We're going to go to special presentations and proclamations. And our first one, and the reason we have these two people here, is recognition for Ian and Molly for their life-saving efforts. So tonight, it's my privilege for recognizing them. Ian and Molly are lifeguards at the Campbell Community Center, and on October 24th of this year, a coach ran onto the pool deck looking for a defibrillator for a teen who collapsed in the gym. So very quickly, Ian and his sister Molly identified there was a medical emergency. They cleared the pool. They responded to the gym with the AED, which is the defibrillator. Ian began CPR. He continued doing so until Santa Clara County Fire arrived and took over life-saving efforts. The fire department administered a shock from the AED. The teen regained his pulse and began breathing on his own. He was transported to a hospital for treatment, and he is now recovering. So if not for the quick thinking and effective life-saving measures performed by Ian and Molly, the outcome of this situation could very well have been tragic. So it's our honor here to ask you to join us in recognizing Ian and Molly for their life-saving efforts. So stay right there. We'll give you a chance to say a couple words, a couple things. I'm going to come down there. I'd like to give you certificates for leading us in the pledge, but also proclamations that are proclamations of the mayor of the city of Campbell, essentially thanking you for your efforts and everything you did. It's just wonderful. So let me come down and present those. And sorry, Chief, would you like to come up as well at that point?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to come up. I just wanted to say on behalf of the Campbell Police Department how grateful we are for your quick actions. If it hadn't have been for your quick thinking and what you did, I think the outcome of this would have been very different. And I think you can see by the crowd of the audience tonight, I know you're not normally here, but it's not normally this large of a crowd in here, that your efforts really are appreciated by our community. And the great thing that we have in Campbell is partnerships, and we have the fire department at the back of the room. So a lot of what we do here that makes Campbell so successful is because of those partnerships. And it's the partnership between you guys as lifeguards, as city employees, the police department, the fire department, that really make this a special place. So on behalf of the Campbell Police Department, I wanted to present each of you with a plaque in recognition of your quick actions and performance that directly save the life of another.
There it is. You're welcome to say a few words if you'd like to.
I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I'm just very happy that me and Ian were on duty as guards, so we were there to stop the situation and help out until it escalated, like to a worse problem, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, yeah, I've never met Ian and Molly. That night, I'm Ryan's father, and that night I was with Connor's at Connor's practice, and Linda had dropped Ryan off at practice that he's been doing for the past, 5 years. It was just a normal practice. My sole focus that week actually was the week tryouts for him, and I didn't want him to get hurt. And I was thinking, oh, I don't want you to sprain an ankle or something. And that was my focus. And, Linda got a text that Ryan fell down, and we're like, oh, maybe he just or something. And then we got a call later from the same person, hurry up, come to the practice. And so Linda was driving frantically. She called me and told me that, Ryan fell, but she didn't know the extent of the situation. And I just sensed something was up. And, and so I went with Connor to started heading to the practice. And the next thing I know, Linda told me, don't go to practice, come to Valley Medical, because he had collapsed on the ground. And, we started putting bits together, and apparently, we were lucky to have such a, great team and parents that jumped into action. Coach Paris, had Donnie, the other coach. We were lucky that 2 coaches were there to, one was calling 911, one was getting instructions. We had a parent, David, who went to go get help, and he was looking for an AED, and he found these 2 amazing heroes for us. And, they started giving CPR, and Ryan they estimated that he stopped breathing for about 5 to 10 minutes during that time. And, because these 2 were able to give CPR and the paramedics came so quick that, Ryan is standing here today. We were in the hospital for 3 weeks at Stanford Children's. He was sedated for a long time. When he came to, it was like, we weren't sure if there was brain damage or those things. And we spent the next, the first week trying to figure out, trying to protect him from not having a cardiac arrest again. And then the next week was about protecting the brain. He finally woke up from all the sedation, and he went into delirium from all the sedation. And so we were not sure if, he had brain damage or from the sedation and those kinds of things. A grueling 3 weeks for us. And then the 3rd week was about him, trying to figure out, how we don't let this happen again. And it's just been, a nightmare for us, but we wouldn't be here having this conversation without these 2. So I just want to thank you all with the bottom of our hearts, our family. It's just thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give these are 2 real heroes. Let's give another round of applause. And special too to have Ryan here. So that's a special treat. So thank you all. I have to tell you, you're not required to stay. You're welcome to stay. You're not required to stay. I know you're not all here for objective standards. So, But you're welcome to stay or not, but please. Thank you for attending though. Yeah, could have kept you here, but wouldn't have been right.
I did want to thank staff for training them well.
I knew there were more than just the regulars. I was sure. I wasn't aware that Ryan was going to be here. So that's actually special. Okay. So we'll move to communication petitions. There are none. City Attorney, is there any report on the closed session?
There is not.
Thank you. We'll go to oral request, the portion of the meeting reserved for persons wishing to address the council on items not on the agenda. And you get up to 2 minutes. Madam Clerk, have we received any, anybody wants to speak? Ken Johnson, come on down. Not on the agenda, correct? Mike's off, I think.
Better?
Yeah.
Nice. Mr. Mayor, City Council, I just want to bring attention to everyone that the 38th Annual Campbell Community Toy Program has begun. And so much like we're not saving lives, but we're changing lives. I would say that for sure. Much as Chief Berg talked about the partnerships, it's the same thing that makes this event so successful in Campbell. We've already received over 650 applications from families in Campbell. And I expect by the time at the end of this month, we'll have over 1,000 applications serving over 3,000 kids in the Campbell School District, providing toys and books and athletic equipment. I want to thank the City of Campbell, the Santa Clara County Fire Department, and let you know about a couple of events that are coming up. The first is the Carol of Lights event that the DCBA is bringing back to downtown Campbell for the first time since COVID. That'll be December 3rd from 3 to 7 downtown with carolers and games and lots of fun. December 8th, we'll have our fundraising mixer at Darling Fisher. And then a very popular thing that started during COVID was us taking Santa Claus around town. And we'll do that twice more. So how the community can help us make a difference is to bring a new unwrapped toy or book or a piece of athletic equipment to either a fire station or many of the drop-off locations throughout Campbell. More information at campbelltoyprogram.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? I don't see anybody online. I don't see any hands up at least. I think they're here for a later issue. Anybody else, Madam Clerk? Okay, in that case, we'll bring it back for council announcements, mayor announcements. City Hall is open to the public for in-person services Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. For your convenience, online services including permits, business license applications, and virtual appointments are available online. Visit the city's website at campbellca.gov to view information for all city departments and services available. The city clerk's office is accepting applications for boards and commissions. To find out more about these positions or to apply, please contact the city clerk's office at 408-866-2117 or visit the city's website at campbellca.gov. Please join us as we celebrate the reopening of Campbell Park. The Campbell Park Improvement Dedication Ceremony is scheduled for November 17th. That is this Thursday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Hope to see all of you there for the official dedication and ribbon cutting ceremony for a beautiful new play area. Ainsley House and Museum Holiday Boutique will be open for public tours every Thursday through Sunday from November 17th through December 18th. For more information about this and other upcoming events, please visit campbellmuseums.com. History Happy Hour returns at the Ainsley House on November 19th when author Brian Earl will present his new book, Christmas Past, the fascinating stories behind our favorite holidays traditions. That will be on November 19th from 5 to 7 p.m. Cost to attend is $15 per person. To register, please visit campbellmuseums.com. The annual Downtown Campbell Carol of Lights celebration will be held on December 3rd from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. This is a free event and everyone is invited to attend. And finally, City Hall offices will be closed November 24th and November 25th in observance of the Thanksgiving Day holiday. And City Hall offices will reopen on November 29th. So we'll move to consent calendar. These are the items that we take as in one motion unless somebody would like to pull an item. Is there anybody? This is items 2 through 5. Does anybody on council, staff, or a member of the public wish to pull an item? None? Maybe? And I will just comment that I will recuse from voting on item 5 because there's a donation there coming from the Parks and Rec Foundation to the city, and I'm going to be handling that check for them. So I will recuse on that piece.
That's what I wanted to pull.
Okay. So I'm
Just
certainly
to say
welcome to
thank
pull
you.
it or so, but I'm just not going to pull it, but I'm just going to recuse from that vote when we vote.
I did want to pull it and just say thank you.
Okay, so let's pull 5. Then is there a motion to approve items 2 through 4?
So moved.
I'll
Sec-
second.
Motion from Councilwoman Landry, second by Vice Mayor Bybee. Can we get a roll call vote?
Councilmember Gibbons,
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez.
Aye.
Councilwoman Landry.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bybee.
Aye.
Mayor Resnikoff.
Aye. So now we'll go to item 5, accept donations from the Campbell Parks and Recreation Foundation, Rotary Club of Campbell for Hyde Park Playground renovations. Councilmember Gibbons?
Excuse me, I hate to interrupt,
That's number
and
4.
I hate to do
Recuse?
this, but since it's been pulled from the consent
Now I
calendar,
recuse.
you are recusing, you would have to, well, only if you're recusing for an actual conflict. I'm not sure that you have one.
I'm on that board and I'm processing the payment. So it's,
Not that, you can stay.
okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to say, we have wonderful organizations and foundations and service groups in Campbell, and they are continually generous to all of the programs that benefit our entire city. And I just wanted to take a note that this is yet another occasion where the Rotary Club is donating, and the Park and Recreation Foundation is donating money for our parks. So thank you, and check out our parks and check out our foundations and join in when you can.
You come Thursday to Campbell Park and see the dedication of the new play area. So given with that, is there a motion to accept 5?
I would move item 5.
Item 5.
Item 5.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Gibbons, second by Councilwoman Landry. Can we get a roll call vote?
Councilmember Gibbons,
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez.
Aye.
Councilwoman Landry.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bybee.
Aye.
Mayor Resnikoff.
And with city attorney's permission, I say aye. Thank you, Bill. Okay, we move to public hearings and introductions of ordinances. Item 6. This is a public hearing to consider the application by TDD GUS, applicant for owner for a major plan development permit modification and extension of approval, PLN 2022-13, to allow for revisions to the architectural design and changes in floor area of a previously approved plan development permit for a 6-lot single-family house subdivision and to extend the approval of the previously approved tentative map for property located at 1429 and 1445 Westmont Avenue in the PD Plan Development Zoning District. Our presenter is Tracy Tam, Associate Planner. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Tracy Tam, Associate Planner, presenting on this item tonight. The item before you is a plan development permit modification and extension of approval for the tentative map for property located at 1429 and 1445 Westmont Avenue. The project site, as mentioned, is located at 1429 and 1445 Westmont Avenue. It's within the San Tomas Area Neighborhood Plan. The site is zoned PD or planned development, and it does have a general plan land use designation of low density residential. The site is surrounded by existing single family homes. So the property may look a little familiar to some of you. It was previously acted upon and approved by the City Council in 2019 to allow for the development of 6 single family homes on the site. The site layout, the site design, the layout, and the lot sizes are the same as the 2019 approval and have not changed, but there is substantial change in the architectural style of the homes. Therefore, that's the reason why it's in front of you tonight. The project was heard at the October 11th Planning Commission meeting and at the August 23rd Site and Architecture Review Committee meetings, and there weren't any public speakers at those meetings. So as mentioned, the applicant is proposing to change the architecture and the floor plans. The applicant is also proposing an extension of approval of the tentative map, and that basically extends the approval by 2 years. The extension approval is really just to give a little more time to the applicant to work on the project. So what you see on the screen is what the City Council had approved for architecture back in 2019. You notice that there's sort of a mix of prairie-style homes and craftsman-style homes. And what the applicant is proposing is now on your screen. Per the applicant, they do want to change the architectural style and the floor plans to better appeal to buyers. Staff and the Planning Commission do recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution allowing for the change in architectural design, a change in floor area, and to extend the approval of the tentative map by 2 years. The staff recommendation also includes some modifications to the conditions of approval as agreed to by the applicant. And this does conclude staff's presentation. I'm here for any questions. The applicant is also joining us via Zoom. They are out of town, and we also have the architect here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Are there questions from council for staff? Councilmember Gibbons, your light's on. Okay. No? No questions. Thank you. So we'll open the public hearing, ask if, to start with the applicant. The applicant you said is on Zoom? Okay, I can't see the whole screen here because, can you release the screen? Yeah, thank you. Okay. It's Kelly. Do I have that right? Kelly, you're the applicant?
Kelly Arodi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ken, would you like to speak? If so, you have up to 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. I'll be very brief. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council, for your time on this project. First, I'd like to thank Tracy Tam for all her efforts she put into this project and the wonderful guidance and advice she gave us to conform with all your ordinances and get us through architecture review and planning commission and in front of you. As Tracy said, the owner just wanted to put their signature on this project with the architecture and the floor plans to better meet the market. And we think this plan before you does that. And like I said, conforms with all the ordinances. On top of that, on lots number 2 and 3, we've added a couple ADUs, which is kind of something you didn't have before. In the audience tonight is our architectural team, as well as our major principal, Stephanie Yee. And I think I will just yield at this point unless you have any specific questions for myself or the team. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So what we'll do is we'll open up to the public. Is there somebody else that wish to speak here? Anybody want to speak as well for the applicant or? See nobody yet. Okay. Anybody else in the public wishing to speak? I don't see anybody in the chamber. I'm sorry. Is there somebody? That's what I was about to go to. So Raja, did you want to speak on this item?
Yeah.
Please,
can you folks hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, this is Raja, 1216 West Hacienda Avenue. I also live in the San Tomas area neighborhood. This is a great project. Especially happy to see ADUs included in the houses. So just wanted to, from the San Tomas neighborhood, just wanted to show the support for the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Raja. Appreciate it. So don't see any other hands up online. And no one in the chamber. So in that case, we'll bring it back to the council for discussion. Who would like to start? Councilwoman Landry.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would like to say I do remember this project coming through last time. And I had a comment that said the utility line was under the trees. And I did look at the drawings and that has been changed. It's moved out farther into the street. So the trees are all going to be very healthy. So I wanted to thank you for that. And also I think the new design really does reflect what the market is bearing right now. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments from the council? Councilmember Gibbons?
If there's no other comments, I would make a motion.
I'll just make a quick comment that I think the designs are nice, and I think it's nice that, as Roger mentioned about ADUs, I remember the first project that came in with ADUs, I think was turned down from adding them in there, and now it's much more the norm to put them in, and it's a positive. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. I think it's a good project. So now, if you would, the motion.
I know what's the matter. May I borrow that for a second? I've got a planning commission agenda, not a council agenda. That the planning commission recommends that the city council take the following action: adopt a resolution approving a major plan development permit modification and extension approval of PLN 22-13 to allow for revisions of the architectural design and changes on the floor area of a previously approved plan development permit for a 6-lot single-family house subdivision, and to extend the approval of the previously approved tentative map, including the carryover of Public Works conditions of approval from prior entitlements and a new condition of approval to supersede prior entitlements, and the findings of the projected categorically exempt under section 15332 of the California Environmental Quality Act. And I don't think there's any modifications that came to us.
No, I don't think so.
I'll second.
So motion by Councilmember Gibbons, second by Vice Mayor Bybee. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gibbons.
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez.
Aye.
Councilwoman Landry.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bybee.
Aye.
Mayor Resnikoff.
Aye, so that passes. Congratulations. Thank you, Tracy. We move to new business item 7, acceptance of an Office of Traffic Safety OTS Selective Traffic Enforcement Program STEP grant. Our presenter, looks like Captain Livingston delegated this to Chief Berg. Good move.
He did, and I'm happy to be here. Speaking tonight about the OTS grant that we applied for and were fortunate enough to receive. We began looking at this grant as a way to supplement traffic enforcement without impacting our existing overtime expenditures. So in January of 2022, we applied to the State of California Office of Traffic Safety, commonly referred to OTS, for a Selective Traffic Enforcement Program grant, or STEP grant. OTS grants are federally funded by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and are designed to make California roadways safer. The grant request was for overtime reimbursement to conduct traffic enforcement efforts in addition to DUI saturation patrols, DUI warrant service operations, and collaborative enforcement with other law enforcement agencies. The grant request was also for reimbursement for officers to attend training on standardized field sobriety tests and alcohol and drug influence detection. In September of this year, we were advised that the agreement was approved with a not to exceed amount of $75,000. There are no fund matching requirements for this grant, and the grant would cover expenditures occurring now through September of next year. And with that, we recommend that council adopt the resolution authorizing the acceptance of this OTS grant. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief Berg. Questions for the Chief? Seeing none, we'll open up the public hearing and ask anybody in the public wishes to speak on this item. I don't see anybody in the chamber or online. So bring it back to council for discussion or a motion.
I just make a comment that I don't think anyone here or in the city would object to more traffic supervision and comments. Desperately needed.
Okay. Motion or?
I'll just add to that as well. Really glad we're able to apply for and qualify for this grant, and really looking forward to the increased services that are just incredibly important. So with that said, I'd be happy to move the motion unless there's any other comments.
Go ahead.
I move that the City Council adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement setting forth terms under which the City of Campbell makes up the 2023 Selective Traffic Enforcement Program grant from the State of California Office of Traffic Safety, and approve a budget adjustment to recognize the grant revenue and corresponding grant related expenditures.
I'll second.
Well, that was a tie. Motion by Council Member Lopez. I'll give second to Councilwoman Landry.
Quick to the draw.
Just edged it out. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gibbons.
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez.
Aye.
Councilwoman Landry.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bybee.
Aye.
Mayor Resnikoff.
Aye, thank you. That passes. We go to unfinished business, item 8, multifamily development design standards and key considerations related to the mapping of walkable and auto-oriented neighborhoods, establishment of off-street parking requirements, and the development of site development and design standards to be addressed as part of the update file number PLN 2022-90. And our presenter is
Rob Eastwood, Community Development Director. Good evening, Mayor Resnikoff, honorable council members. Thank you for allowing time tonight to discuss this. My job tonight will mostly be to tee this up, hand this off to staff, and just assist on facilitating the discussion. So the council will remember approximately 2-3 weeks ago, we had a study session with you and the commission. The intent of that study session was to provide an educational foundation on how we're preparing our objective design standards. It is a bit of a different approach that's been used in other jurisdictions. As a follow-up to that, we are coming back to you tonight on one of the first steps on preparing the standards, and that's getting your initial feedback on some key points that will go into developing the standards. For tonight, we have kind of two parts to the presentation. First, staff will present some background and context on the areas we're looking for your feedback on. And so the proposed initial part is just to provide some context, background, so the issue is teed up, you know, the background on it. After that, we are recommending to pause, go ahead and take public comment. Then we'll come back to you, and on each of the 5 subject areas, we will go ahead and present what the question is, what the Plan Commission had as a recommendation. They met on this item last week, what staff recommendation is moving forward, and to get your comments and feedback to move forward on that. One thing to know up front, or two things to know up front. One is this is generally, I won't say the very beginning of the process, but there are a lot of steps ahead. And so keep in mind that the guidance provided tonight doesn't result in a finished product. It's to help mold standards that will continue to be refined between now and March. And the target is to adopt these in tandem with the housing element, general plan, and zoning ordinance updates in March. So there is opportunity ahead to mold these. You won't be taking actions or guidance tonight that boxes count on a certain corner or provides final direction on how these standards will come out. It's initial guidance, number one. Number two, what we're coming to you with is a little bit on the borderline of technical policy. So it's argued in a few of these, you actually do need a bit of a technical mind to provide guidance. And so to assist the council, what we've provided is a bit more context on the background, number one. Number two, the Plan Commission really did get a bit into this, and so we provided you their thoughts and recommendations. They had some more ample areas to get into the technical elements of it. And in 3, really the staff recommendation, which we think takes into component a lot of the more technical sides of this, if it can assist the council. So, but do keep in mind that not typically some of these, often we should come to you with policy recommendations where we educate you and you give policy guidance. Some of these are borderline on policy technical. If you have questions on some of those technical parts, we're more than happy to assist you, but just some, as you read the report, heads up front on these. So with that, I am going to hand over the presentation. We have a combination presentation by our consultant, Opticos, and I believe that's Tony Perez and others of the Opticos staff, including either Roger Foreman or Russell Toller. And then also we have Tracy Tam and Stephen Rose presenting. So with that.
Hey, Rob, yes. Let me just repeat what you said. So after we go through the presentation, we'll take questions, we'll go to public comment, but you're going to come back and for those 5 items, one by one, give us a summary of the comments and the recommendation, and we'll see if there's consent or questions or comments or changes desired. And we'll go through each one. We'll go through the council on each one independently.
That is correct. Yeah. And to each one, I realize after the fact the staff report might have provided a little more open-ended questions. We're trying to make the discussion points a little more succinct. What you be tonight is the question we're asking, Planning Commission context, staff recommendation, and then provide it to council for any additional guidance based on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I believe we're up. Thank you, Mr. Eastwood. My name is Russell Toller. I'm with Opticos Design. It's a pleasure to be here again, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. I'll be sharing my screen. Okay, I hope everybody could see that. So we're calling this the walkability map. And this mapping exercise is a key step in a lot of the coding work we do. And it helps us do two things. First, it helps us understand which zones would be most appropriate where, but it also helps us, it allows the development standards to be differentiated according to the context of each site. We also call this the context map sometimes. So some development standards are more supportive of what is intended to become a more walkable environment. And these are places where the expectation is that people will arrive to these places and navigate the neighborhood on foot, where the building facades are more human scaled and interesting, and where the physical environment is just generally more comfortable for pedestrian activity. Whereas other standards are more supportive of what we're calling a drivable environment. And these are the places where it's the opposite expectation. Most people are probably going to be arriving by car, even accessing the site by car, where convenient parking is expected, and where the character of the environment isn't as important as in walkable places. So there's many ways in which the development standards might differ as a result of this context mapping, but these are the main ones. And I'll just pause here for a second so you could glance at this. These are also some of the topics that we'll be covering further in the conversation. So real quick, what we mean by walkable, it's exactly as we experience. So sometimes it's hard to put our finger on what makes a place walkable, but you could think of it as generally what characterizes downtown. Now, not all walkable places are as good as downtown Campbell, but generally they're characterized by small blocks so that you can get anywhere you want to easily on foot. There's a lot of places worth visiting that are useful places to visit too within proximity, and comfortable sidewalks. Generally, it's easier to cross the street. It's just a comfortable environment to be on a bike, on foot. And generally they're places, right? Places to be rather than to get in and out of or to get through. The opposite is drivable. Drivable contexts are different, and sometimes they merit different sorts of development standards. So these are places that are just not really set up for people to get around easily on foot or bike. They're typically characterized by larger blocks, as you can see in this aerial. There's a separation of uses, often faster traffic, fewer places to cross the street, etc. And so a lot of this mapping that we've done so far has been very straightforward and intuitive. They've been, it's been informed largely by existing city policy as found in the general plan and the area plans, by existing conditioning analyses on the ground. But these sites that are circled, these parcels in pink, are areas where it really could go either way. And these are the places that we were hoping to get a little direction from tonight from the City Council. So I'll just zoom into these three places just real quick, and we could come back to these slides later on tonight when we discuss them. Around San Tomas Plaza, Hamilton and Lee, or sorry, West Hamilton, west of the expressway, and then finally Hamilton and Lee on those parcels. So that concludes this this topic, and I'll pass it on to I think Stephen, Mr. Rose.
So thank you and good evening, members of the council. So among the standards we're talking about tonight, parking standards is crucial to the update. And as a result, we're evaluating potential reductions to the city's parking standards, which are fundamental, as we all know, to the design and feasibility of residential development projects. So really recognizing the comprehensive update of our parking standards would be a work plan in and of itself. Our effort has used existing standards and state density bonus law as kind of bookends or guideposts to our update process. Generally understanding that we don't want to obviously raise the standards higher than what they currently are at, and we don't want to be, say, more permissive than those which would otherwise be allowed by state density bonus law, because we kind of take away an incentive for building affordable housing. We also took a look at the draft housing element. We had a policy H3A, understanding it's in a draft form, but we did look at it, which does indicate that we should be considering parking reductions going down to as little as 2 spaces per unit, consider eliminating guest parking, as well as looking at other parking reduction strategies such as unbundling parking and the like. And further, in addition to just talking about the numeric number of parking spaces, we also had a consideration point of whether or not we should change the dimensional requirements of our parking standards. So right now the city requires larger parking spaces for residential than it does for commercial. So we're talking about possibly evaluating a uniform parking standard going forward. So, to form up our analysis, we considered parking standards which are used by nearby communities. And that's kind of that comparison survey, which we included as an attachment to the report. We also took a look at recent amendments to state law, such as the passage of AB 2097, as well as we took into account feedback from developers, and that's both market rate and affordable housing developers, which had opined on which standards would be supported for developments in their types of projects. So for market rate, we really heard a number somewhere between 1 to 1.5 would generally make sense or pencil for most projects, while understanding that even if the city were to say not require any parking at all, there's an understanding that lenders and the ability to finance and capitalize on projects, there would need to be some parking usually for projects. Affordable housing developers express a slightly lower standard. Their context, market environment's a little bit different. They're looking for a number between 0.5 and 0.75. And then finally, we had an ad hoc subcommittee formed of members of the Planning Commission, which had come to a recommendation of about 1.25 spaces per unit. So really taking all this into account, staff's recommendations still the table, which is included in the report, which you see here on the screen. We are recommending, I'd say generally a modest decrease in some parking in some areas, say changing our studio to 1 bedroom from say 2.5 spaces down to just 2, and similar changes in our other categories. We're also looking at doing some cleanup and refinement. We have standards for our city, which are kind of based on either just a per unit or non-unit basis, and they're downtown or distinct from otherwhere. So we have a kind of a consolidated table, trying to clean that all up and provide a parity with state density bonus law. We are also separately saying that we should consider a lower parking standard as part of the city's affordable housing overlay zone. So this is another tool which we were looking to introduce as part of the housing element process, where we'd say certain areas of the city, maybe we apply an affordable housing overlay, and in exchange for providing meetings, say other city local objectives, or providing a greater degree of affordable housing, that maybe in those sites we could get a reduced parking standard. That's how we'd respond to the needs of affordable housing developers. And then finally, our point here is on establishing a uniform parking standard of 8.5 by 18, kind of switching from our higher standard as exists today. So in regard to design, we had this overarching conversation point about how prescriptive or how flexible we should be. So really in developing all these new tools, which we're talking about, we really need to determine how flexible or how prescriptive the design standard should be to achieve desired outcomes. So really based on feedback to date, it's clear to us that the city doesn't have a defined architectural style, and there isn't a desire to create one or establish one as part of this update like what you'd see in Santa Barbara. But there's a wide array of options from going from pure variety to that prescriptive cookie cutter order that you'd expect. And we're trying to strike the right balance between those two. Now, the good news is, again, kind of like parking, we kind of have our guideposts. We know on one end, we have our existing standards, which we want to carry forward as part of this update. So we've digested all of our area plans, all of our existing development standards, and we plan to carry those forward. And we know on the far end of the spectrum, we don't want to become Santa Barbara. We don't want to have those specific architectural standards in play. So again, as a reminder, the form-based approach, form-based codes do provide for these palettes of options, which can provide very specific standards to govern various aspects of building and site design. We can kind of pick and choose from among those which we want to apply to a project or to certain areas of the city on a contextual basis. So again, these tools, they provide a menu of options which allow a developer to pick from these available choices. And I like these two images on the screen because I think they highlight a key element of how the form-based code works. You might, for example, have in the downtown a standard that says, hey, we want to make sure that buildings aren't 100% stucco or like 90% stucco, like what you see in the bottom left example. So we're going to have a minimum glazing standard. Say it's like 20% of the building wall has to have glass. But we also don't want the building to be 100% glass where it's suddenly becoming a big glass jewel box building. So we're going to say up to 80%. But even though you have a standard that's showing you how you can go about achieving that, and even though it's a prescriptive standard, there's a wide array of flexibility about how you go about achieving it. To such an extent, the likelihood of a developer, any two developers saying, okay, I'm going to do exactly 22% glazing, and you have that exact same design outcome across this field of design palettes and design choices and options is exceedingly unlikely. And even if you didn't have, one of the points I think we make in the report is, even if you didn't have any prescriptive standards, even if you completely eliminated and said, okay, developers can do what developers want to do, they could just take this exact same project and copy paste it throughout the whole city. So having these standards does provide some degree of control. It does build in flexibility because certain standards are applied in certain areas of the community, and they might be distinct from other areas of the community depending on where we land. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tracy Tam, who's going to cover our next talking point, which is on adjacency and context.
Thank you, Stephen. So we do recognize that there could be situations where a large building is placed next to a smaller building. We also do recognize that there could be buildings adjacent to the creek. And so we've heard from the Community Planning Commission and also youth city council members that adjacency standards are important, and it's something that we should consider. The city does have some existing adjacency standards, notably in the Winchester Boulevard Master Plan, that applies a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, and it doesn't really take context or property size or configuration into consideration. The image actually on the slide is from the Winchester Boulevard Master Plan. And so the one-size-fits-all approach is a problem because often it doesn't work. As an example, the image on the slide requires a 2-to-1 slope for new development, but you'll notice that the lot depth of the new project is pretty deep. And this wouldn't necessarily work on a property that's shallow and actually might preclude development from happening. And we've also heard from developers and our consultant Opticos that this sort of slope line approach does have the potential of conflicting with the proposed general plan land use designations that are under contemplation in the draft general plan. Therefore, staff does recommend to have a variety of options that are really context specific. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And to give a couple examples, you could have an adjacency standard that only applies to a shallow lot, or a standard that applies to a property that's next to a highway or expressway, or ones that apply in areas that are more walkable, more dense, things like that. Oh, thank you. So there are a couple ways to approach these adjacency standards. A couple are shown on the slide here. So the first row of images that you see is placing a smaller building closer to a lower intensity use, where the larger part of the building is further away from the lower intensity use. And it's really to provide a decrease in building height and massing. And actually the image to the right of that is a real life example in the city of Berkeley, where they did sort of apply the lower height, lower intensity building next to an existing residence there. The second row of pictures is the sort of wedding caking approach that is in the Winchester Boulevard Master Plan. So you'll notice that the building progressively gets shorter. It's taller at the front, progressively gets shorter as it gets closer to a sensitive area. And the last image there, just under the bullet points, it does show a physical break in building massing. So you'll notice that you'll have a portion of the building open space and a portion of the building. And really, the intent here is so you're not seeing a large continuous expanse of the building. And with that, I'll hand it over to Opticos to talk about the large site standards.
Thank you, Tracy. So when we talk about the large site standards, the driving theme is to integrate the development on these large sites into the surrounding neighborhood. And let me share my screen here. Let's see. Can you all see the slide? Okay, excellent. So with the large site standards, the goals that we're achieving are integrating the large site development into the surrounding neighborhood by providing better connectivity and public realm improvements. And Campbell does have language in the general plan regarding these goals that staff has highlighted here. There are strategies around connecting dead-end streets that exist adjacent to the property that's being developed, as well as increasing bicycle and pedestrian connections on the site and between the site and within the surrounding neighborhood. There's also language related to civic space, supporting pedestrian amenities such as plazas and landscaped areas with seating, including public art, special paving, tile, and fountains, and ensuring public spaces for community gatherings and events. But in order for all of these to be supported through development that's subject to the streamlining process, Campbell would need to have objective standards in place that would require these. And right now, those tools are not in place. So here's an example of a potential outcome apart from such standards, in which you have an extremely long building which is taking up the entire site and doesn't allow for that connectivity. And so the idea behind the large site standards is it provides a set of objective tools to achieve those goals of connectivity and public realm improvements. And they're doing this through a series of discrete steps. The first of which is creating new blocks from the large site, adding thoroughfares and civic space to bring that public realm onto the site, and then applying zones according to the immediate context. And so this is another way to ensure that specific parts of the site respond to what they're adjacent to. And the reason we have this dashed line here is because from this point on, the development process is the same as it would be for any other site. The standards that apply from that point forward are the same as they would be on a smaller site. So with regard to the connectivity options, we've developed some recommendations through our discussions with Planning Commission, discussions with developers, and the recommendations that we've developed through that process involve permitting narrower pedestrian and bike-focused thoroughfares between blocks, so not necessarily requiring a full 60-foot street right-of-way to be added, but this could be much narrower and more intimate, as you can see on the images on the right. However, we would set minimum thoroughfare dimensions for these to allow for emergency vehicle access, because that would be one major goal for the connectivity, in addition to pedestrians and bikes. Civic spaces could also serve as pieces of this connectivity network. However, the staff and the Planning Commission do not recommend requiring that these spaces be dedicated to the city, so they could remain private, just allowing for access. With regard to the civic space, staff and Planning Commission are recommending dedicating a percentage of developable land for a public accessible civic space so that the amount of space would scale with the size of the site. In our meetings with the public, they've expressed desire for seating, shade, and well-maintained landscaping. Planning Commission favors including public art in these spaces. And staff and Planning Commission favor offering concessions to the developers to offset the cost of adding thoroughfares and civic space. Says there is potentially additional cost to provide these, as well as taking away land that could theoretically be devoted to a building. And so we're looking at ways to compensate for that. So there are a couple of major questions involved when we're dealing with these large site standards. The first is, how large is large? And in general, the idea behind the large site standards is that these are sites that are larger than a city block. But the threshold where they are triggered is open to discussion. In our studies so far, we've had discussions with the Planning Commission, we've had feedback from developers, we've had test fits involving the building types that developers have expressed interest in. And so all of those have fed into this recommendation where we've arrived at sites of approximately 5 or more acres would trigger the large site standards, or 700 or more feet in length, which relates to the long building that we showed earlier. So that was over 700 feet, if that gives you a frame of reference. And then there's a question of the dimensions of the new blocks which are created out of the large site. And so staff and Planning Commission are recommending limiting dimensions of these new blocks to reinforce the walkable pattern. And the recommendation here is for an 1,800-foot block perimeter, which lines up more or less with the minimum dimensions for the building types that the developers have expressed interest in. And so here we have a series of diagrams which shows how this might take place on an actual site. This represents the division into blocks with the thoroughfares in between and the addition of civic space. And this is the ultimate result, where you have this entire site, but it's broken down so that you can actually pass through it among the various buildings that make up the project. And there's civic space, which can contribute not only to the enjoyment of the residents, but enjoyment of neighbors as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
So that concludes the main presentation. So this will be the opportunity to stop for public comment. And then following public comment, we will kick back up slides to kind of facilitate council discussion on key discussion points on each of those 5 topic areas.
Before we go to public comment, we're going to go questions from the council though first. Are there questions? Councilmember Lopez, we'll start.
Thank you. I'll start more specific and move up to bigger picture, and great job presenting that and structuring that to really break it down in a helpful way. So first, I'm looking at package page 294. That's looking at some of the what's current and what's proposed for some of the parking standards. And for small lot single family, could you explain the proposal to remove that standard, which I understand modifying it, but defaulting to bedroom count standards? Is that common practice, or are we trying to move to that? Just thinking behind that.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, so first I want to just clarify that we're not changing single-family development standards. I know this is a separate line item. Has to do with townhomes, duets, multifamily, attached, small lot construction products. It's just the way that we define it in our code. So that clarification notwithstanding, yeah, we currently require among the highest parking standards in that category. It's 3 spaces per unit. It's 2.5 plus a half, 2.5 spaces plus a half guest. And the idea here is the original intent I'll convey first, which is you have a small subdivision of townhomes, and the idea was that because you don't have as much public frontage in those kind of circumstances, that you might need to provide more guest parking space on site for within the common lot, the common area. So this standard is kind of unique because it's irrespective of the bedroom count. So you could have a 1-bedroom small lot townhome, and it's the same standards if you had a 4-bedroom. So we're considering just, again, this is kind of getting at that cleanup, the clarification, trying to make sure all of our standards have parity to this whole bedroom count standard. And it also kind of links and connects well, as you're seeing on the table there on the right. Density bonus doesn't have a standard that's dealing with small lots. It just deals with bedroom counts. So we're trying to standardize it and make it a little bit more uniform. But yes, that's the overall overarching consideration there.
Okay, and so it would remove that, and it would be the same as, for example, studio to 1-bedroom, 2 or more bedrooms, 4 more bedrooms. That's what the actual number would change to.
Yeah, so you're seeing we have 2 different contexts with drivable and non-drivable, or I forget what auto oriented.
Right, just using that one as an example.
Right, correct. So they'd be reducing to the column in the middle, the drivable areas. That's the staff recommendation as it stands right now.
Okay, and so small at single family would just change.
That would, oh yes, so that would default. If it was a studio to 1-bedroom, it'd be 2. If it was 2 or more, it'd be 2.5.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. The large site discussion, how would we, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, I think those are largely good recommendations, but public art, if we're moving to objective standards, could that be problematic? How's that defined? Would there need to be requirements there?
There wouldn't be a prescriptive standard, say what art is or what it should look like. It generally reflects something like a percentage, like 1% of the project overall cost needs to go towards public art, which would be designated in the civic plaza center area. We're not going to have standards defining what the art needs to be or what it should look like. It's just more like a percentage of the project budget or something like that, which we'd evaluate, developing a standard, a threshold for which, and designated where on the site it would need to occur.
So understanding the need to both balance flexibility and, well, I'll save that for a comment. Actually, I'll come back to that. So, but thank you. And then just more of a big picture question. By designating, so we'll get into the drivable versus walkable and what's in between in that discussion. But just from an overall perspective, some areas that fall into the drivable category, whether or not we decide to keep them there, that may not have been by intent. That's just the result of decisions over the decades, zoning changes, all these things. These areas have ended up that way. So my question is, by designating them now as drivable, are we making that decision to lock them into that, and then that's just always going to be drivable barring any other changes, and so we're guaranteeing that that's going to be car oriented and maybe just making the problem worse?
I could say 2 parts. One is when you're thinking about the drivable and auto-oriented context, or drivable and walkable context, it's one part aspirational. It doesn't necessarily need to reflect the exact existing condition. You could be thinking of what should it be 40, 50 years from now, right? But there will obviously be opportunities to tweak and refine these standards. If you assign something, let's say drivable today, and in the future these areas become more dense, and in the future it makes sense for it to become walkable, we could revisit the standard, amend it, change what the standards are. I'll just offer one bit of commentary here. The Planning Commission, when they were talking about the drivable and auto-oriented context, they arrived at the conclusion of 2 completely different perspectives at times. Some of the commissioners looked at it from the perspective of, hey, this area is walkable because, hey, you can get connected to a light rail stop or you can get connected to downtown. Other commissioners are looking at areas like the San Tomas Plaza area as, hey, that's more like that urban village concept. We think we have enough critical mass there, enough overall acreage where that area in and of itself could be walkable, even if it's disconnected. It's like an island upon itself from the broader Campbell community. So there's two different ways of looking at it, and one was, yeah, admittedly little bit more aspirational.
Great. I appreciate that. And again, I'll come back to that in the comments, but appreciate that context. That's all.
That's it. Councilmember Gibbons.
Thank you. I did watch the Planning Commission meeting, so I had a chance to absorb this a little bit. So thank you for going through everything so thoroughly. I appreciate that. So I have a lot of questions and comments. I'll try and keep them specific to what we're talking about here. So my first question is that the walkable pink areas and things got me confused. Will the entire city be broken into specific form-based zoning constructs?
Yes, ultimately, so this is what we're seeing as the first step in that process. So as we're using walkable and drivable as an organizing principle that will eventually lead to the form-based zone map.
Okay, so the whole city will be, thank you for that.
Well, let me clarify. Again, we're only zoning the multifamily residential and mixed-use sites. We're not talking at this stage as part of this update process of remapping our industrial areas or single family.
Okay, I'll take that under consideration. So my question is, what's the purpose behind walkable areas? I mean, I was trying to understand, is there some credit that's to be obtained? Is there some goal? I'm asking the question because some of the pink areas are around the opportunity sites are already fully developed. So like at the San Tomas Plaza, it's concluding the residential areas around its perimeter. Didn't understand that.
Yeah, so I'd say that the areas which we're applying are multifamily sites. And if those sites were to redevelop, the standards by which they would redevelop would be in a manner, if let's say they were to demo the entire structure that was there and they wanted to do so, what standards apply in the future? So we're creating a threshold. Now, the whole idea behind walkable and drivable, Tony, I think Russell actually had a slide, which is kind of showing a couple examples of why or how you might differentiate drivable and walkable contexts. So if you're in a drivable area, maybe you don't, your type of pedestrian engagement doesn't need to be there. But if you're in a walkable environment, say like the downtown, you might want to have certain entry features.
So that was clear. My question is more in the slide example specifically about the San Tomas Plaza. It extended the pink area into the existing residential neighborhoods adjoining that area. And I wanted to understand, why would you extend the definition of drivable or walkable into existing fully developed neighborhoods?
So, I mean, that'd be a good consideration for the council. So we're hearing on one of those opportunity areas, question of how far should we take the standards? But again, you could cut it. You could curtail it at the limits of the San Tomas Plaza, for instance, or you could say, yes, extend it into those residential neighborhoods because there's this broader.
Why did they do what they did? That's my question. Why did they extend it beyond the opportunity site?
Can I comment on that? I'm happy to elaborate on that. This is Tony Burrows from Opticos. Councilmember Gibbons, your question goes back to something that Councilmember Lopez was asking about, whether the identification of walkable or drivable is what it is now or what it can be in the future. And it's a little of both. It's what we use this approach many times to simply recognize the places that are already walkable, and the current zoning doesn't recognize that. And they have to do a lot of workarounds to make those areas to recognize the standards well enough for those areas that are different than the areas that are more auto dependent. So we found over 20 years of doing this that most zoning standards don't recognize areas that are, they only recognize auto dependent areas, and then you have to do a lot of workarounds to make them recognize areas that are not auto dependent. And so we use this identification process to say, what is auto dependent now and what isn't? And then you can change that, but it is that already. In the case of your question on Santa Tomas Plaza, the wanting to change the shopping center to be a walkable place is one thing, but we found that usually the properties within a certain walking distance of that amenity also usually want the opportunity to be walkable also. In this case, it may be a policy decision here that you might say only the shopping center property should be a walkable project or walkable area, and the existing lots around it should stay in an auto-dependent form. However, the likelihood, because if you make Santa Tomas Plaza walkable, the likelihood is that those surrounding properties will be seen a little differently because they have that proximity to that walkable place.
So I could sort of guess that, but what I couldn't understand is, are you proposing cutting through the adjacent parcels to create a walking connection?
No. However, in your general plan, which is what we have to follow, if there was policy direction in your general plan that said, oh, there's a lot or vacant parcel, and it's in an area where it would make a beneficial connection to a shopping center it's going to change, then that could be carried out in zoning. That is not our direction right now. We have not received that direction to do that.
Okay, I don't think that's at all clear. And one of my comments is about definitions. I don't think that's at all clear in the presentation and how to go forward. So that's what led me to my next questions is, have you looked at other walkable areas like the walkable area path that the students take to all our schools? We have a lot of schools and we have a lot of safety issues with walking to our schools. So how does the natural walking path relate to where we know people do walk and the kids do bike? So I don't know if you can answer that right now, but to me, if you're talking about walkability and versus drive, I think you have to be thoughtful about how you define what you're looking at. And the other one I didn't understand was why you didn't include walkability to places of employment, such as along the southern Winchester, south of the light rail station, where there's a lot of businesses. So why wouldn't that area be defined as walkable?
Roger, can you elaborate on that, please?
I think when we were talking about destinations that defined a walkable place, we were focusing on things that would benefit everyone in the surrounding area, regardless of whether they happen to be employed in a particular office building. So that's why we focused on things like grocery stores, because that's something that everyone is going to use on a daily basis. Is that
okay? I'll just, hopefully people will start looking at asking those kind of questions too, because it doesn't make sense to me. If you're really looking to achieve a walkable community, I don't understand why other walkable things aren't included. So on the off-street parking, I would comment or question. I'm trying to ask only my questions. I appreciate that you want that. There is what I was looking for and couldn't find in your design standards was a definition or a location or an impact of where we would want mixed use projects and where we wouldn't, because that's been a big question. So is there some piece of illustration that defines where we do want mixed use and where we don't?
We're not quite there yet. So we're kind of, again, looking at this as a first step in the mapping process. So based on generally these organizing principles of walkable and drivable context, understand drivable is usually less mixed use in character, nature. that we'd probably come back with, again, we talked about the form-based zoning map. Implementation of that would then provide more prescriptive guidance saying these specific sites, these specific areas, maybe even the specific frontage of this one side of a property should have a mixed use component that's, say, 20 feet deep. We'll get there. We're still at this kind of organizing broad, high level conversation point of which areas of the city are walkable and which areas are drivable before we get there.
I appreciate what you're trying to do, but how in the design standards, you've got a bunch of different facade situations. I didn't see anything that talks about when we want to have, for example, restaurants. We have a lot of problem with restaurants spilling over into the streets. So is there something in the design standards that would allow a requirement that if there is a restaurant use, there has to be on-site outside space? How do you define that in your design standard approach?
Tony, somebody on your team want to address that in more specifics?
Yeah, so Councilmember Gibbons, are you asking about whether or not restaurants are allowed to have outdoor dining?
No, I am saying that restaurants typically do want outside dining, and what our design standard approach accomplishes that. And I was looking at your sample facades and your different illustrations, and I didn't see anything about that. So what is your thought on that?
Yeah, so the outdoor dining, it can either happen on the property between the building and the sidewalk, or it can happen on the sidewalk if the jurisdiction allows it. And usually jurisdictions allow it subject to, pedestrian access being provided, through on the sidewalk. So yes, I've never seen it not allowed. It's how.
Well, that's my question. I don't see anything in your documentation.
Yeah, so the objective standards that we've been writing don't include that, because usually the cities already have very specific outdoor dining regulations or ordinances that they don't want to change, and they just keep applying those. That's why they're not in the toolkit that you have.
Okay, that's an important clarification for the big picture. The other thing, let's see, and I will try and finish up. My challenge is that everything is so broad-based, so big picture, that it doesn't answer the everyday questions and the situations we have. So you gave an example of the Winchester Boulevard cross-section with sight lines, and said it wasn't appropriate because it didn't allow the maximum development of the site, or the sites were skinny or big or narrow and all in variables. That was known at the time. So the decision, my question is, you seem to be making decisions based on capacity of site, not on context, which is the definition of the section that you're in. Because if you do some of the things you're proposing, there's a complete loss of privacy. So I'm trying to understand what is your basis, what is your criteria for example, the wedding cake picture?
I can speak to that first real briefly, and I'll let Tony add. So I wouldn't characterize that the wedding cake, the slope line approach is necessarily ruled out as part of this process. There might be contexts where it makes sense, where that lot depth, like Tracy was mentioning earlier, is achievable or plausible. On some of those shallower lots where it does present the problem where the plan for density can't be achieved, the standards need to give way one of two ways. And we're identifying potential alternatives which could be presented in those situations, which would be context specific. So we would identify those sites or those areas, apply appropriate form-based zones, site-specific. So if the lot is a smaller site, or it was a combination of smaller sites to provide for that.
So forgive me, I don't think that's what you've done. the examples don't illustrate what you just said because the criteria isn't clear. Okay, I'll try and go to some other questions. Go ahead and let someone else talk.
Councilwoman Landry?
Hi. What do you mean by cookie cutter versus something that is eclectic? Define cookie cutter.
So cookie cutter, in the example we provided in that slide earlier, showing the super, I forget what it was, the term I used, it's like a uniform appearance where every building is identical. Because you apply the exact same standards, you can practically see the setbacks. You could see the development standards in the field. Every home's the same height, they have the exact same pitch, same gable, same materials, same colors. That's very cookie cutter outcomes. Eclectic is more getting at the idea of this organic, developed over time. It's varied. Nothing's consistent. But it's representative of what happened at that time in history, I guess you could say. So Campbell, we've heard that there's a desire for an eclectic that Campbell has built organically over time, and there's a desire to continue to provide for, allow for that type of eclectic mix of architectural styles and designs and building types going forward. So what we're trying to say is we want to land somewhere maybe in the between being you don't want to be so prescriptive. Again, you're becoming Santa Barbara, where you're defining a precise architectural style. Everything looks the same. Everything's cookie cutter. To total chaos on the other side, which would be where you don't have any regulations at all or any control. So you have it's kind of like that organized middle ground, like where you have some element of both.
Okay, this is where definitions kind of make a difference, because that's not my impression of what cookie cutter means. Of you saying one building has a 500 feet of the same facade. To me, cookie cutter is you pick a little area and you do something a little different. And that's why I asked, how does that relate to being eclectic? Let's see, questions. On page 20 of the memo, under LUT-14.6C, it says adding fountains. Why are we adding fountains in the height of a drought? And if it is a fountain, is there a backup plan so when there's no water, there's still an attractive feature?
So just comment that particular land, that's a current general plan. Our existing general plan land use policy speaks to that effect. So as far as needing to comply with water efficiency, landscaping ordinance requirements and the like, I mean, that's something that we could take a look at as part of our new general plan. Maybe that policy needs to go away. I don't know if it did get carried forward, but for the intent of these standards which we pulled in this report, we're pulling existing policy language to provide guidance that, hey, we do know that we have this guidance and we're trying to carry that forward into the creation of these design standards. So we're just pulling every single relevant example we could to say, generally speaking, we have standards which encourage the creation of civic centers, plazas, open space in these like large sites.
Okay. I think you answered the question about what is the size of a city block. Yeah, you answered that one. I find it interesting, or no, that's not a question. I'm sorry. Okay, that's my questions.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Bybee.
So, Stephen, I had a question regarding the order and variety, and you mentioned an example about glazing, and that having a range of the building to be 20% to 90% of glazing, as an example. And if there was a range established and that was the preferred or the standard that we used, if an applicant came in and a development proposal came in and they wanted 90% of the building glazed, and it really possibly may not fit within the area, or it may not be compatible, does the council have any flexibility in recommending that they lower their percentage of the glazing, or is it you have a range and then it's up to the applicant to determine how they want their building to look?
So these would be assigned as, these are, again, the objective standards which apply. They have to meet those ranges, but we have the ability to say specifically in the downtown, we want to tighten that range. We want to make it only between 80 and 70% glazing. And it's very prescriptive. Now, if you fall outside that range, we could provide a administrative remedy or opportunity for them to go through a discretionary process. But we have very clear upfront, again, knowable standards at the time of application submittal. If they meet all those requirements, you're kind of going down a checklist. I met that, in which case it's practically pre-designed before they even meet with staff, or they go through and they can just refer to these new standards and know exactly what they're going to get. And it provides greater certainty for developers as well as the public.
Okay. And on the public art, would there be any city review of the public art or approval of the public art? Or is that strictly determined because it's private development?
I would say where we're at right now in this process is we're just broadly speaking, should we create large site standards? And if so, what are the types of amenities we'd like to see in those types of projects? If public art's consideration, we'll have to look at like the Civic Improvement Commission, tools, mechanisms to make all that happen. I know they'd be probably excited to see more art projects in the city, but exactly how the mechanisms of how we're going to get there, we're not there yet at this stage.
Okay. And then finally, I'm still kind of trying to understand the walkable, drivable situation. And I specifically with San Tomas Aquino Plaza, and I can understand why that possibly we would consider making it walkable if the center does get redeveloped or changed. But is it an all or not nothing, or can it be part walkable, part drivable? Because across the street to the west and then to the south, there's two centers that, you know, I would consider walkable, drivable, because there are people that do walk to Nob Hill from the neighborhood. They walk to Big Lots, but they also drive because it's, you know, a grocery store that services the west part of Campbell. So is there flexibility, or is it all or nothing?
I would broadly characterize that, again, the form-based approach allows you to land exactly where you want to get. It depends on how much energy you want to put into the exercise. To say, when you've got a large site, it's over 5 acres, 50% of it has to be walkable, 50% of it can be drivable, but they have the option for being walkable, right? That's something you could write into a standard. Now, generally speaking, when you're creating a walkable area, you generally want it to be connected to the broader area, and you want it to be connected. And the way to do that is by making that whole area walkable. And you're thinking about those inner pathways and connections. It's kind of this odd, I don't want to say it's odd or to provide a segment of the property, but you could arrive at that conclusion. You could say those areas which front the street, say Santa Tomas Aquino, those need to be walkable. But if you're interior to the lot, you're in the back, you're up against the residential units at the rear, that could be more of that drivable context or something like that, provided that there's maybe one pedestrian paseo or connection that gets you to the walkable context, which is up against the street. All that's possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Stephen, a few questions. So back to the off-site parking regulation. You mentioned something about a uniform space is 8.5 feet by 18 feet. What's current? There may not be one standard, but what's typical today?
So for residential, it's 9 by 20 is our residential parking standard. And again, it's 8.5 by 18 for commercial. So this does
today.
That's today. Okay. So when we're talking about a transition, we're trying to standardize it. What happens in a lot of our mixed use projects, let's say like the Revere project, you have these parking garages where the ground floor has slightly larger residential spaces than the commercial. And you create this you create this mismatch between the parking regulations applied. And when you're designing parking garages, you're trying to get at a uniform standard. So when you turn around, you go up a ramp, you go down a ramp, everything's kind of uniform. It makes it for a more efficient site design, parking stall layout. And right now that mix match also creates complications where you have, say, a guest parking space requirement, or areas are used between uses. So when the commercial user is no longer in use, they want to make it available to a residential use. Well, that presents a problem because that standard is a commercial standard, it's not a residential standard. So in order for that combination use to occur, it needs to have a uniform standard.
Okay, but you're suggesting reducing the residential standard down to commercial everywhere.
Yeah, the 8.5 by 18, correct.
Okay. In the design standards, so I guess you're talking about cookie cutter versus too flexible, too much variety, and it's very difficult to define too much variety. If I understood you right, maybe I want to clarify this. You're saying if there's a range of various options that people can pick from, developers can pick from, the reality is that when you pick from all those options, you're not going to get the same thing just because there's too many variables in the to make the whole. Is that how you're kind of fighting too much variety? I mean, and what is too much variety?
What I'd characterize it as, we have the form-based approach allows you to have standards which regulate every aspect of a building design, site placement, your frontage types, your roof, whatever, all these elements within individual standards which you apply to a site, these buckets, these palettes of options. Even if we were to say pick the exact same porch treatment, right? It provides variation, like you can have between 3 steps and 4 steps, or 1 step and 4 steps to get up to that front porch to get there. So there's variation in outcome, even though you have the general overall organizing principle of it needs to be a porch, right? So in just picking that one element, okay, now you've got the porch. Now we're talking about the building itself, the mass. It's a big, long building. Maybe you need to offset it. Nothing says it needs to be offset only on the right side of the building. Be offset on the left side of the building where you set it back. There's different ways of you achieving that. I was giving the glazing example because I think it's the easiest to kind of understand that you could provide ranges of standards, like 60 to 70% as a range, but each standard would have a built-in flexibility, and we can decide exactly how tight we want that range to be or how flexible we want it to be to achieve, again, an eclectic design where you have a lot more variety, or a lot more where we're practically shrink wrapping the standards. Like we really want it to look a certain way, and you're shrink wrapping those standards onto exactly this. We want to model this exact project. It needs to come out exactly this way, in which case those ranges get tighter and tighter and tighter to provide that level of order.
You mentioned it stops developers from duplicating, a site everywhere, but is that because you're changing the allowable range of standards in different areas? Because so if you have the same standard, same range of standards in different areas, I can build something here, and as long as it met all the standards and there's the same range of standards here, I can build the same thing. I don't understand unless you're changing this. Maybe I misunderstood. Unless you're changing those ranges, what's allowed in different areas, how does that stop somebody from doing a cookie cutter?
Yeah, you absolutely can, actually. So what I'm getting at is you could have a specific form-based code standard, which is saying if you're doing a front facade in the downtown, that's different. Even though you have the same front facade standard, that's distinct than if you're on Bascom.
Right? So every porch can have 2 or 3 or 4 steps, but you could say in this area they're to the left, in this area they're to the right. Is it?
That's correct. You could. Okay. You could be so specific. So we're going to be creating a map. Okay. So I was trying to go back to when we were explaining this at the November 1st meeting. In broad strokes, we're talking about, we have our current general plan map, which organizes like land use principles. We have our zoning map, which is it's general organizing principles, land use, what uses should go there. And we're talking about creating a third map, a third level of depth, which is really the design standards. And exactly you get to pick and color code to individual properties or portions of those properties exactly what standards are going to apply where. And you can, again, I couldn't recommend infinite numbers of different form-based zones any more than we have our current zoning map. We have a certain number of zoning districts, but you could have more specificity if you believe that was warranted in a certain context.
So the range of standards along Bascom could be different than the range of standards along Hamilton, although they both define porches and.
Correct. Yeah, you could have 2 different porch standards in different different areas of the city.
And if a project meets the ranges of all the standards, it's approved automatically.
Well, we'll have to get back at the permitting process discussion later, but generally speaking, you can't deny a project if it's meeting all these requirements, or to reduce its density if it's meeting all these requirements.
So in those
for residential projects.
So this is some simplifying it, but in those cases, is this ministerial approval? I mean, a big project's going to come in and they meet they're within the range of every standard you set, doesn't have to go to planning commission.
Again, there's going to be an opportunity for us to have a discussion about that later on, about what should this new permit process look like. But again, the overall overarching paradigm shift is we used to have a much more robust public review process, And now we're really talking about front loading all that review before they even meet a planner. They could pick up this code, pick up these standards, check all the boxes, and yes, there could be a ministerial review process that could dictate and determine that it meets all the requirements and it's just approved by right, just be a building permit.
Okay. Vice Mayor asked about public art. So I understand how you can do standards for particular media. You can do standards, probably have a range of sizes, whatever, textures. How do you do a standard for the content of a mural, for example? I'll get the city attorney, because this is signage again in a way. But I mean, if you say a mural can be in this material, in this media, and this size on the side of a building, for example, how does the city maintain that a mural is appropriate or inappropriate?
Again, I'd probably say these standards aren't going to that level of specificity as to stipulating art elements or murals. Again, we're sticking at the overarching building envelope, design, mass, bulk, articulation standards. You run to a bunch of First Amendment issues if you start trying to dictate and determine what a mural is. What I have seen other jurisdictions do is they have a mural requirement where you say that if it's approved on a building, that it has to outlast the tenant. So that kind of is a tool by which I've seen some jurisdictions say that if you do have, let's say, a burger on a building and it's a burger joint, right? Then if that turns over and becomes, a Indian food restaurant, not to provide a specific example here, but that mural can't go away. So they kind of puts it on the property owner to understand that that's a permanent fixture. It's an architectural element of your building. And I don't want to go into too much detail here. But
I wasn't thinking of burgers, but okay, Bill, maybe.
And another way that this is sometimes handled is the space for the art is dedicated to the city, and then it becomes city speech as to what goes there.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. So just a couple more questions. Now we're the large sites and the subjective. You mentioned a few criteria: greater than or equal to 5 acres, greater than or equal to 700 feet in length, 1,800 foot block perimeter. So in Campbell, the sites that we're looking at, how many would meet that criteria? That's a pretty big site, right? So I would think Fry's site, maybe West Hamilton, maybe, but I mean, how many sites are we talking about that really would meet this subjective large site criteria?
I believe it's in the neighborhood of 20. I can look up the map that we made.
20. At some point, I'd like to get more specific on that. That seems like a lot, because I wouldn't have thought we would have had that many that met that criteria. But and then as far as in that same vein, the fear of taking up a whole block, has that even ever been proposed in Campbell? Has anybody tried to bring forth a project? I mean, you show some pretty extremes of, big rectangle that's taken up street after street. Has it ever been an issue in Campbell? Has it ever been proposed?
Well, again, I would emphasize that in years gone past, the city had a lot more discretionary control authority over projects, which has now been taken away. What the future might hold might be distinct from what the past provided, where we had a lot more discretionary control. Usually planners are working with applicants to try to make their projects be more consistent with the neighborhood context and design. I can't say in Campbell we've ever had that super megalith building. I don't know if there's very many sites could have the example which we had here on the screen a moment ago. But I mean, without such standards, that could be our future, because again, these standards, the design of these buildings are being determined before it even reaches a planner, before it even reaches a commission, before it reaches a council.
But isn't it self-regulated in some sense, in that those projects still have to sell, right? Somebody designs a project, you design something that is a big rectangle that takes up 3 straight blocks, and then tell people you can pay $2 million a unit, and it's not as attractive as articulating this. I guess it could happen, but I wonder, is it realistic?
I think there's actually relevant examples in Cupertino near the Valco Mall. You could point to probably other examples, but again, if it's a for sale product versus a for rent product, I do know there can be less discerning markets in play.
Let me see. Last question. You mentioned to get the thoroughfares, pedestrian bike focused thoroughfares, concessions to heights, parking, etc. what's the unintended consequences of that? Because to push a thoroughfare, then you run the risk of having a project come in at some point with no parking when there would have been parking, or exceeding the height limits that we have. There's a trade-off there, right? So you can push to reduce the cost of the thoroughfares, and in a residential area, let them drastically reduce the parking, which is going to impact people negatively more than the positive nature of a thoroughfare.
Yeah, it's definitely a trade-off, which is why we highlighted it in the report, that you don't necessarily have to. Some of the feedback which we received from developers is it can be costly to divide these sites into more manageable, smaller blocks with all these interconnected roadway networks, and you do lose your your buildable area as a result of those. You don't have to have streets, though. You could have pedestrian corridors. You could have these other things which tighten it up and allow for that type of connectivity without the same type of impact. So depending on what they're offering and what the benefit of that offering is, there might be a reciprocity with what the city council, what the decision-making body might offer in exchange, like concessions such as increases in height or reductions in other development standards, to recognize the fact that they're giving up something on their site to provide a better public benefit or good. Like if they're providing that civic center, that civic plaza center, you don't only need to think about it of the roadway connections. You can think about it about the open space or the art elements. Maybe they're doing those things. They're allocating a percentage of their budget to make that happen. Maybe there's something somewhere that we would give.
Okay, and last follow up to that, and we'll open up to the public right after that. Are you suggesting then that if there were concessions, would it be done like a density bonus where essentially they can pick which one they want? Because we very well, we may not want in certain areas any parking concessions. It's it could be bad enough as is. But when we do density bonuses, do you want a height? Do you want to go bigger? Do you want to go higher? You want to get less parking? And if I remember right, it's been their choice. Which ones do we select? So are you suggesting the same thing here? If we did that and said, well, you can go higher, you can go no parking, you can go denser, whatever, it's their choice, or can we control that?
You can specify where and how. So you could actually take a site like Santa Moss Plaza Shopping Center, right? And you could say that we're going to provide a height increase, but only for that first 50 feet up against the street, and not the full depth of the lot all the way where you have an adjacency of residential units.
So we could say based on adjacency, and if it's adjacent to whatever, then the parking concession is not offered there, but it might be offered somewhere else in a commercial area.
Correct. You could say that particular site's off limits for parking, and only this other area would we consider it because of some other criteria. So long as it's predefined and clear.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mayor Stephen. This is Tony. Can I offer something? So before we go into using the term concession in this context, I just advise that we do some analysis to understand really what is the effect of a 20-foot paseo through a property, and really understand how much less, if any, development is being removed, and maybe if it turns out that there is potential removed, maybe use the concept of additional potential as opposed to concession, just for the sake of clarity and not confusing it with density bonus and other tools, and also not to see it as a potential as opposed to something you're giving up on or giving it on. So just advice.
Okay, thank you.
I would also just briefly add, I mean, you do have sites, the recent St. Anton development on Railway. They did need to provide roadway networks connectivity through their site just to meet fire aerial access requirements and get basic maneuverability to their private parking garages and the garages underneath the units of the apartment building itself. So some of those connections are made naturally through projects, but this would provide a stopgap against those super monolith, super block buildings where there's no break, and they achieve it by some other means.
Thank you. So we've all had our shot here. I'd like to open up the public hearing to see if we have people like to speak. And actually have a speaker card. We'll start out with Steve Saunders. Thank you for your patience. Come on up. A couple minutes, 2 minutes. If there's anybody else that'd like to speak, we'll follow that. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. When we started out this, I came to the council and said, oh, Campbell is the most densely populated city in Santa Clara County. Well, I sort of forgot about the city of Santa Clara, which is in Santa Clara County. We're about 1% less dense than them. And if you look at Mountain View and Sunnyvale, they're a little bit less dense. San Jose is about 15% less dense. The upshot of all of that, and I'm going to make an unfounded claim here. If you look at all four of those cities, Mountain View, San Jose, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, they have a greater percentage of their population living above the third floor than Campbell does, because we don't have very many buildings that have people living on the fourth, fifth, so on floor. And what that really looks like to me is that Campbell is built out. So really our only option is to build up now. When we want to add housing, we're going to have taller housing. At the same time, and this speaks to the adjacency and context area, I really don't want to have, the new housing towering over residential areas. I really like the layer cake approach that was described before. In fact, it's like, if you're going to have something that's going to have to be big and massive, have it be big and massive over public spaces and save reduce the mass as it goes towards residential areas. The other aspect of that, which I haven't heard mentioned, and I don't know if there's state law related to it, but if you're going to build a big building to the south of an existing residence, what are you going to do about that person's right to generate solar electricity? If you're blocking the sun from them, that has to be considered too. And that really all just leaves me with one conclusion, is you have to really consider raising the roof. That if we don't want something towering right over residential houses, we're going to have to, in some cases, consider raising the height limit. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the chamber that would speak? Please come on up. We have 2 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Dave Hopkins with Sarah Regis Group, local real estate development company, built the Parktown Place right next door. Great to be back in Campbell. And we're looking at a site that's uniquely positioned for residential, we believe. It's an old office building and it's on Bascom. It's multi-tenanted, but weekly tenanted at the moment. Offers great access to the creek trail. Everything we're hearing and working with staff has been very encouraging in terms of the depth of thought going into this process. It's an intense amount of information and studying. I think all of this is surfacing the key issues early from the perspective of someone trying to bring a application in to actually deliver these homes. It's helpful to know where the pressure points are and where the key issues lie for this community. So we are very appreciative of all that. I'll just lay out a few concerns we have as we look at this, and hopefully they can be considered. The large sites considered, it seems like this has actually come a long ways even since Planning Commission. If there are really 20, I still think that's a concern. That's a lot. And there is an issue when you start to take land and carve up sites. And, there's good reasons to do that on very large sites. But if there's 20 of them, there's going to be a number of properties that will not be developable on that basis. Parking, it needs to be lower. And I think the numbers we've seen in these reports are getting into the right range. Developers are not going to propose less than the market requires, and the market requires within the ranges that are being discussed. It is different on for sale than it is on for rent. The unit home, the types of homes, the sizes of the homes, the demographics of the folks that live there are very different. So it needs to be considered as well. Walkability is fantastic. Everything should be walkable as far as the principle of design. Even the locations that are more like ours on Bascom, that's clearly not a walkable street. But as we improve that site, we should build bigger sidewalks, landscape them, and plant many trees. So that's all good stuff. And I think the architectural design standards is our biggest concern. I would just say, let our architects do what they do best. They're really good. And we like to push them hard, but it's hard if they're told what to do before they even start.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul, are you allowed to say what parcel on Bascom it is you're looking at?
No problem. Yeah, it's 1475 South Bascom, the Creekside Business Park office building.
Off Creekside Way or facing
on Bascom, south of Hamilton.
but before Jack in the Box.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in the chamber wishing to speak? Ken, was that you were moving forward? I wasn't sure. Okay, let me go online here. I think, Raja, did you want to speak on this one? I see your hand up. Madam Clerk, is he muted? There we go.
Okay. Mic check. Can you folks hear me?
Go ahead, please.
Hey, first of all, to start with, I appreciate Rob, Stephen, and staff's time for this mammoth work in the short amount of time they have. The other thing, parking requirements. Parking requirements are going, like, it's a fact that they're going to make or break the feasibility of a construction. So we have to reduce this. State has eliminated the parking requirements for lots that are within the radius of 0.5 miles from major transit centers. So there is a reason why state is pounding on the cities. So we have to go with the intent of the state law to reduce way too impractical parking standards. Having said that, it's unfortunate to see that over decades, city has converted existing commercial spaces to residential in the St. Thomas neighborhood area. Right now, there are no commercial areas in that area. It's all housing. And now the possible lots in that area are being designated as drivable because there are no commercial spaces. Right? The city has taken away the commercial spaces, and now they are saying it's only drivable and not walkable because there are no commercial spaces to go to. And city is not making any provisions, but seeing it as drivable is a little unfair. Also, there is a VTA bus that goes from Winchester Station to West Valley College. I don't see that marked in the map. I know it's a little less frequency, once in our bus route instead of 2 times like where the other red lines are. But then it becomes a chicken and egg problem, right? If you don't consider those routes, the frequency of the usage of bus doesn't go up. And if you don't build housing that makes it encourageable to use the bus lots, it doesn't. The other thing I wanted to highlight is, we have for a 1-bedroom studio or 1-bedroom, if we keep asking for like 2 parking lots, that actually drives, how to build and the feasibility of construction law. So I think we can go to 1 space for like studios or 2 bedrooms, apartments. Yeah, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Raja. And we also have James Sullivan. I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Jim Sullivan, both a resident of Campbell as well as a developer. I wanted to thank staff. Number one, I thought they and Opticos did a great job reaching out not only to the community, but to the developer, having a couple developer roundtable meetings. 2 topics really quickly that I just wanted to bring up. The parking standards and parking dimensions that staff are recommending, I feel are appropriate. And I hope council will give that due consideration. I'm a little bit concerned, and I was at the I listened to the planning commission meeting last week along with council member Gibbons. And I think that Commissioner Kamkar had brought up when the question was brought to him that there were 9 of the 144 spaces or parcels that were either at 4.9 acres or above. So I don't know if Stephen's, kind of double checking that, but Commissioner Kamkar seemed to know what he was talking about. I happen to represent one of those property owners, and I think the council remembers 251 Llewellyn Avenue. And even though that's not going to be a high density site, and we're not planning what you would consider a megalith, kind of building along that area, I haven't broken it down into blocks per se. We came up with a standard of having kind of some detached homes along Llewellyn and Latimer, and then the denser attached townhomes would be kind of behind that. That was the medium density project that I had proposed to the council about 18 months ago. And I just hope, I don't know, it's clearly a large site. It's about 5.56 acres, but it's not a high density site. So how that plays, with what staff is thinking. And it's just something, to kind of consider. And again, I'm not surrounded by 4 streets that are interconnectable. We have San Tomas on one side, we have the Cambrian, park development on the other side. So we will have connectivity, obviously within the development, but it's not going to be something that the public will be necessarily walking from one side to the other on. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. So, Madam Clerk, I don't see anybody else online? And no, anybody in the chamber, I think is, okay, so we'll bring it back to council. I've had a request to take a 10-minute break. We've been going since 6 o'clock or so we can do that. What's reasonable? Quarter of a little less than 10 minutes at 9:45? Okay, we'll come back. And then when we come back, we'll go through one by one what, as planning said, and we'll make comments on each section. Thank you.
See?
Okay, thank you very much. We're back, and we're going to bring this back. Item, what is it? Item 8 still for council discussion. Rob, we're going to bring it back, as you explained, to go through the 5 areas of the main presentation. You're going to give us the Planning Commission recommendations, staff recommendations, and if we can, and maybe the best way to do this is if there are areas we don't agree with or additions or whatever, comment. If somebody's in full agreement with what the recommendations are, let's just let that go through, and we'll focus on when we're not in agreement with. Okay. You're not in the call anymore? Yeah, I see you. I still see you. You're on. I see you. Okay, you're back, and she's back. She's back.
No more breaks for you.
Yeah, it's a multi.
So we do have 5 areas. I know the hour is getting late. To assist with the discussion, in many instances, we provided you Plan Commission and staff recommendation, or it's sort of a yes or no question on some of these. So I'll present these, but of course the staff is going to have to assist with sort of the technical background. So the first item that was presented to you was your feedback on 3 areas of the city falling either the walkable or the drivable bucket. This was presented to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission recommended, I'm seeing area 1 here, which is the San Tomas area, was recommended as walkable. That's for the first one. Can we go to the next one just to batch all these? Second one is the area on Hamilton Avenue. I think that's on San Tomas. Again, the Planning Commission also recommended this as walkable. If you have questions on that, I'm planning to give some context on their thinking there. And then finally, the third area, I believe, is on East Hamilton and Lee, and also the Planning Commission recommended as walkable. So those are it's a binary choice. You have the recommendation of the Planning Commission on all 3. And again, that would be item 1 here, then to council, given the feedback of the Planning Commission on all 3. Council's additional feedback on that issue. On these issues.
Again, were they all walkable? I'm sorry, 1, 2, and 3 were all recommended walkable?
That is correct.
Okay. So you want to go through, so you specifically want agreement or disagreement with those 3 areas?
Yeah, it could be as simple as we concur with the Planning Commission, maybe one area you have comments or questions on. But if you'd say the staff and Planning Commission recommendation is walkable in all 3 areas, that would be the most, that's the simplest item that's before you to agree or disagree with.
Okay, this will help us shoot through. Councilman Landry, did you want to start? We're just going to go down the path, and we're going to do this. We'll go the other way in the next one, and we'll get through all 5, hopefully.
Walkable, walkable, walkable.
Yeah, basically agree with the recommendations. I feel especially strongly about area 3. I know the groceries are called out. A lot of people walk to the restaurants with takeout. People walk all the time.
Councilmember Gibbons?
So I can't answer the question until I ask this other question, which is, when you're defining walkable, to me, you seem to be making 2 definitions of walkable. One is, I'm going to call it internally walkable. It's self-serving, like Santa Tomas Aquino. It's totally self-serving, but does not have public transit. Same thing is true on Hamilton. You're talking about self-serving area, but it doesn't have a school, it doesn't have transit. So what I'm trying to understand, and that was the reason for my earlier question, why I'm finding a dichotomy between the original 5 criteria that you gave us for the location of the opportunity sites. And I don't see how these sites fit into that. Can you explain why you think these are? I'm sorry. I understand what we're trying to do. I understand why we're trying to do it, and I don't disagree with a new approach, but I don't understand the definitions that are being used and the decisions that are picking these.
So those are two different questions.
Agreed.
I'll address the second and then ask the Opticos team to address the first. And keep in mind, we're doing multiple things at once. We have a general plan update, a housing element update, and this, and they interlink and they're separable also. So in some instance, the decision on housing opportunity sites is related to this. If you look at the San Tomas
Ideally, it should be,
area,
yes.
we are designating high density development in those areas. And so I think that's what fed into the Planning Commission's thoughts of, I mean, perhaps if you weren't planning housing development there, you just call it drivable. But if you're planning for higher density, it's an opportunity to put design factors in to make it walkable. And I think that the shades of that also comes up on the Hamilton, San Tomas area. We have designated housing sites there also. That being said, if you designate housing there, you can still use design standards that recognize it's an area that is more drivable versus walkable. So there's discretion there versus an area like the downtown where obviously it's a walkable environment. So, I mean, if that helps pinpoint it, that's why I think there's more discretion in these areas. There's planned development. The question is, we plan the development, how should it look and feel with respect to a place where you typically be suburban versus sort of an urban village?
So I get that, but like on the Hamilton, on the Lee and Hamilton one, or the San Tomas one, that's why I keep asking, why are you extending it into our existing residential areas? What does that expansion contribute to the discussion for opportunity sites?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Opticos answer, but I think keep in mind, this is only for housing opportunity sites, multifamily development. The policy ramifications of this will not affect single family development. My understanding is they painted with a broader brush because you need to understand certain areas, but the resultant of this is not dictating that in those single family neighborhoods, there's some new design standard that makes housing development there walkable.
Okay, so if you can write that definition of what walkable means. I mean, I have read the staff report, I promise I did. But if you want to talk a sphere of influence, that's perfectly fine. But when you look at this objectively, you just, as a community member, and you look at the whole thing being pink, you think the whole thing is going to be changed. So I'm asking for clarity in that.
I just want to clarify that when we're working on these new standards, they're applying to all multifamily and mixed-use development sites, irrespective if they're a housing opportunity site. So the reason why we're including those additional sites you're seeing behind the actual housing opportunity site, Santa Masakina Plaza Shopping Center, is because those are also multifamily residential sites. It doesn't have anything to do with the sphere of influence around the housing opportunity site, or there's a direct nexus or connection to housing opportunity sites in this mapping exercise. What we're starting at is just this overall principle. This is an area, all of the properties in this area, that they don't clearly map to either a walkable or auto-oriented context. That's why we're asking you the question. In approaching the sites, which direction should we go in the future? But it's best not to imagine as a direct connection to the housing site, because this is an independent exercise.
Okay, so it's not, as I said, it's easy to read the information as it stands, that these are all areas subject to redevelopment. So the definition you've just given makes a lot of sense, but it's not in the documentation. So I'm just offering that I think we need to be more thoughtful of what we're saying and asking, and what the illustration needs, a footnote or a legend or something like that. So I'm fine with these 3 sites. I question where there shouldn't be others.
Okay.
Okay.
I think
Thank
we have
you.
the feedback.
Yes to all 3.
Same here. Yes to all 3.
Just to add briefly to what Councilmember Gibbons said and her earlier comments, I also would support looking for example, at businesses, including that, maybe some walkable areas for workplaces. I understand the criteria that was used here. I think it makes sense, but would also support looking at expanding some of that if it makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was item one.
One down.
We're going to move on to item two. And so as staff had presented, done a lot of research on this. As Stephen presented, we've landed on a staff recommendation on the, it's on the screen, on the change in the parking standards. The staff recommendation is on the table. Do note when it went to the Planning Commission, there wasn't a clear consensus. Some planning commissioners did want a lower ratio, so that's important for the council to understand. There was some discussion on parking reduction strategies. So this is if transit is provided, ride sharing, TDM policies, you could reduce this further. Those are very typical in any parking ordinance. So the two things before the council today is agree or disagree with staff recommendation, and as an alternative, you do have the 1.25 units that some commissioners had recommended. That's item one. And then item two is if there's any feedback on other parking reduction measures, we can look into those regardless, but that's other things that be considered. So those two items are before you.
Okay, thank you. We'll start the other side now. Councilmember Gibbons.
Okay, so I am fine with the total number of spaces, but I'm not, I'd like to suggest a different breakdown of them. And I think that we have to recognize well, there's a couple of things. I'm trying to be thoughtful here. There's a lot, eliminating guest parking is not realistic. You need to have guest parking. We would be better off providing shared parking in some of these cases than giving it all to the units. And the reason I think that's important is because of the discussion on bundling, which we didn't get to tonight. We've had a lot of examples around the city the last few years of where parking was separated from the units, specifically rental units, and the renters didn't rent the spaces and parked on the street and caused a significant impact on the neighborhood and on city parking lots. And what was also happening is that the property owner was renting the parking spaces out at more and more and more money because it was a cash flow source. So I think we do have to keep at least one parking space bundled with the unit. I think there can be a difference. Someone made a comment. There is a distinction between the for rent and for sale. So I think we have to distinguish that in terms of residential parking. But I think we need to open up the opportunity to provide guest parking and to provide for delivery vehicles. We now live in a society with delivery vehicles, be it Amazon or what's the other one, FedEx or any of those. So we have a problem with them parking in the street, blocking the street. So I think that that's an important issue. I'd also like to comment that it's important to recognize that street parking is not free. The city of Campbell's residents over years have paid for that street, that sidewalk, that parking, and to give it to a developer for their convenience, I think needs to be thoughtfully evaluated. We had a problem over on Railway where the road was too narrow to provide parking. So they tore out a whole bunch of city landscaping sidewalk just so they could have parking in front of their building. So I think we need to have some way of recognizing how the streets in Campbell, which are narrow, Bud is another one, which is a significantly narrow street, which would have significant impact by development in that area. So I don't think we can eliminate parking. I know we have to in some areas. I'm not saying we don't follow state law, but I think there's some things that we should think about. There should be spaces for, and this may be too much detail, you may say it belongs in an ordinance, but we need to think about car sharing and EV charging and bicycle parking and all the kinds of things. And I think the city of San Jose is coming up with 25 different options for how they can handle their parking. reductions. So I think there's a lot more that can be incorporated into this. And I didn't, I think that one of the issues about walkability and parking is the parking, if it's, and again, I don't know where this fits into this definition of multi-use. If they do want to provide parking, how are we going to define where that parking is? Can we say if you want to build it, you don't have to, but if you want to, it needs to be below grade, or it has to be at grade, but it can't be on the second floor. I don't know where that fits into these design discussions. We have a couple of documents that I don't see incorporated here. One is Campbell's PDAs and the documents that showed parking and sidewalks for that. There's also a bunch of documents being put out by ABAG and MTC that have requirements for transit-oriented community parking. There's a policy to promote housing and commercial development near transit stations, and there's a parking and curb management recommendation. So I'd like to make sure that what we're putting into this recognizes those documents, because we're going to be looking for funding based on those criteria. So I'd just like to encourage that as well. But overall, to answer your questions, I'm okay with the staff recommendations, but reassigning it. So for count, I'm fine, but I would recommend reassigning it to allow for guest parking and delivery trucks and that kind of thing.
Thank you. Councilmember Lopez.
Thank you. And are you asking here also about the reduction of the sizes of the spaces, or is that going to be another slide?
It wasn't. We thought there wouldn't be much discussion on creating uniformity in the standards. If any of the council members believe that's.
No, I'm fine with that, and I'll also just say I look forward to seeing the exploration of the lower parking standards for the affordable housing overlay zone. I know that'll be another discussion. I think this is definitely moving in the right direction, and I'd support that. I would actually, I strongly support in some cases where it makes sense going a little bit lower than what's here in line with some of the commenters, and just off. I understand keeping the goalpost between, you don't want to go lower than the density bonus. That makes perfect sense. But I think within that we could do a little bit more that would still make sense for the projects and for the community. And specifically, drivable studio to 1 bedroom, I would go to 1.5. Walkable studio to 1 bedroom, I would go to 1. And walkable 2 or more, I'd go to 1.5, and then maybe create another category for 4 or more, if we're going to do that. But that'll just be me. I still think that'd be very reasonable. I think if we're designating areas as walkable, it would make sense to go to that level. And then I appreciate also the comment that the first public speaker made that was just mentioned about potentially different standards for rental versus owning. And I don't quite know what the implications would be of that and how that would change the numbers, but would be interested in exploring those distinctions. I'll just say I concur with a lot of what was just said about exploring ideas for just ways to distribute that differently, allow more flexibility there. I think could be a positive thing, and great point that I hadn't thought of, but that's very real with the delivery vehicles. And it presents a real hazard when they're pushed out to the street and they're parked there with hazard lights on, and it creates a lot of safety issues. I would also be interested in seeing, we've had a lot of discussion of how, in some cases we may have to go up with housing units. And I wonder if it would make sense to encourage going up with parking spaces rather and encouraging garages. And I throw that out as an idea. I don't know what the cost implications of that would be, if it would make it easier or more expensive. Maybe it would depend on the project, but where that makes sense, perhaps that would allow for housing types that better fit the area and the uses. If the parking doesn't have to be isn't on the ground. So to just throw that out as perhaps something to explore. Thank you.
Councilman Landry.
Yes, thank you. Should any changes to the parking table be made? I'm not convinced yet that we should, but I know we should. Does that make sense? I'm very concerned that we're going to cut down parking so bad that we're going to totally impact our streets, or we're going to deprive people from having a car. And I use my classic example of the woman living in her car all of a sudden is allowed to have a unit in a low density or low cost housing, but she has to give away her car to live there because they don't have a parking space. Now she's burdened in other areas. So I understand the developments are going to kind of dictate what these minimums are, but I'll accept what you propose here, but I don't think I want to go any lower. I know I don't want to go any lower. So I don't want any other parking reduction strategies. I don't want to get rid of the requirement for guest parking, because that's actually where the impact could be greater. You know, you have a guest come to visit and they have nowhere to park. So either you don't get the guest or they're impacting the streets. And we can't afford to have parking permit programs all over the city. PD is not going to like that. We won't have officers. We won't have, you know, people are going to go, I'm calling, they're parking and they're not in my area and we can't get the car out there for 4 or 5 hours. So I'm not good on that. I agree with the service vehicle. There's too many projects around here that they did not put in a loading zone, and the trucks are parking everywhere, blocking traffic or blocking 2 or 3 parking spaces because they park parallel to the end of the space. I don't see, there's a mention of the word multimodal, but there's no discussion. There was one area that talks about reducing the parking, but putting in bikes in that space. I don't see anything about motorcycles. I don't see last mile mobility devices, which probably means smaller than a car, but where are they going to park? So EV, bicycles, scooters, motorcycles, service pickup and drop off, storage of bicycles, corrals or whatever, and what San Jose has 25 new categories. ICS could probably have 10 of what I'm bringing up right now. Let's see, what was the other comment I had about parking? What I find interesting is we're trying to get rid of cars and parking, but then we talk about oriented and vehicle oriented. That seems like an oxymoron there. Let's see, what was the other comment I had about parking? I can't find it right now. Darn it, where is it? Okay, so if it's walkable, does that mean solely it's walkable as you can get there from other places, or that it's internally walkable? Because some of these sites, like the Santa Moss and Campbell site, where I want to say where the hobby store was, but that's been gone a long time. So you've got the Nob Hill one and you got the one diagonally across. Within them, they're walkable, but I don't see people necessarily walking to them from great distances. So to me, walkable goes back to the definition. Is it internally walkable? Is it how you get there walkable? And I already made comments on your map. You show the half-mile radius from the light rail station on this side of Highway 17, and the half-mile goes over to the other side to the tech park, and there's no way that's a half mile to walk there. So that's where the definition of walkable and who's, as it relates to parking.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
So I do support the staff recommendation. I think the reductions are reasonable, and I concur with the consideration to maintain or retain some guest parking, because I do think that that could impact a person's ability and overflow onto the street. And so whatever can be done to consider that would be good.
Thank you. And I agree that the standards for the reductions as listed are fine. I wouldn't go further. I think we do need to have guest parking. I don't think we have a problem anymore with places renting out. We did have it at one particular place and it wasn't legal to the CUP and it was fixed. I don't know that that's a problem. In the delivery zones, I mean, if you're in a multi-family, I guess, where there's somebody there for a long time, that's fine. But my experience is we have tons of delivery trucks. They move fast. They stop, they deliver, they get out and move. So it's annoying when it happens, but they're gone before you know it. So I don't see it as big a problem. It's probably a bigger problem speeding through the streets and actually stopping and doing a delivery in 30 seconds and moving on to the next one. I think it requires, as you reduce parking, more bike parking, but also safe storage of bikes. So that's probably even more important. I don't necessarily support reducing all the parking spaces. I mean, it's a nice goal to say everybody have a smaller car and some of the EVs are maybe smaller, but the reality is existing car, just as we know, all existing cars aren't going to go away anytime soon. People have cars. I think they're still going to have trucks and SUVs. And, now we talk gas going to between 5 and 6 minute jump to 3 or so. That was going to be the end of all vehicles. What happened? SUVs just took off. So I think we got to be careful about reducing it down, hoping that it almost forces the result, but I think people aren't getting rid of their large cars anytime soon. You mentioned on here transit passes. I always say this reality is in our community, that's light rail and buses. It's a nice thought, but it's not a trade-off it's not a reason to have fewer spots, because while there may be some people that decide to move specifically by light rail because they can use light rail, other people are going to move into the neighborhoods they want to move into, and they just can't avail themselves of light rail or buses. So I don't think our transportation supports any significant change by offsetting with transit passes. Councilwoman Landry mentioned the parking permit areas. Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to see any more of those. What's going to happen is as long as they're in an adjacent neighborhood, it's going to spread. You can't have one. We could where we did it because we had some natural borders of San Tomas and San Jose and Winchester and Hamilton, and people weren't crossing those streets to park and then going home. If you do it in a contiguous neighborhood, it just got to spread, and eventually you have to have one everywhere. And I think that's a horrible result. They never work. Lastly, let's see. Oh, just one other question. So when we are reducing, especially in multi-family areas, how does that impact the availability of the number of EV chargers we're going to have? I worry more in the very large developments where are there enough, and you're not going to put them probably in every spot, but if we reduce down spots, is that going to create a problem where you need some dedicated areas just for those, or are they still just going to be recommended in individual spots?
It is still ratio based. So let's say multifamily development was required to do 20 EV charging. The new codes, the REACH codes, which you weighed in on your last meeting, a certain portion of that would have to be EV charging. It's not additive. In addition to
those are in a common area, I take it, right?
Well, it depends. Yeah, it does get more difficult with multifamily, how they design it, right? If it's bundled and assigned to units. I know typically in those situations, if you have the unbundled or the guest parking or the common parking, that's where the EV charging will go. Okay,
so I mean that makes guest parking that much more critical. So I think it ties in. We just hadn't mentioned that, so I just want to do that. But otherwise, as proposed, I'm fine with just those comments. Okay, I think that's for.
May I make?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I'd just like to agree with what some of the comments have been. It's important to recognize that people on low income wages they often do, in fact, own one car or two cars because we don't have public transit that takes them where they need to go. So we have to be thoughtful that eliminating parking for affordable units may in fact be counterproductive. And the other thing is, I happen to live near a school, and I can assure you 40% of the population in this city drives their kids to and from school every day. So I don't know how that pattern would change in the future, but cars are used for alternatives other than walking. As Councilwoman Landry just said, are we talking internally walkable versus going out and doing the things people have to do, be it appointments, be it shopping, be it work? So I think we have to be thoughtful about, again, coming to the right definition of when we talk about walkable. And I just offer that one of the things I learned and passed on to staff is I mentioned the funding from MTC and ABAG. One of their proposals is that in order for cities to get pedestrian and bicycle access across barriers such as Highway 17 and the creek, is to apply for funding to do bridges across highways and other physical obstacles, because it's significantly a barrier on our eastern side of the city.
Thank you. Okay, we're on to number 3. These are the design standards. So basically, as Planner Rose had characterized this, more to come in a lot of these categories. It was the bookends of over prescriptive, or you could use the term cookie cutter, versus more chaotic. Staff and PC recommend establishing standards to regulate all aspects of a building design, which still allow a lot of options going forward on where that's applied. We did ask the Planning Commission, and also bring to council, are there specific areas of the city where you think we should be more prescriptive and have a heightened architectural standard? And we do have your comments from before on Campbell not having one prescriptive architectural standard for reference. So what we're coming to you basically is just with that question. I understand the direction in general is to allow the option of different ways to regulate buildings going forward. We'll come back with those options. But at this point, if you have any guidance on being more prescriptive, say in the downtown or certain gateway areas, that's the question we're bringing to you tonight.
Okay, Councilman Landry, want to start?
So in the report, you asked about gateway locations. Is this under this topic?
That's correct.
Because you mentioned the word, okay, so I disagree with the staff recommendation and Planning Commission establishing design standards to regulate all aspects of a building design. That include the color of the paint. I don't think we should be regulating that. If I want to put in something pink, beige, white, yellow, blue, then to me that goes to our eclectic nature. So I don't agree with the first comment here about regulate all aspects of building design unless you define what all means. Is it down to the paint level? And so regarding gateways, so things that I think should warrant a higher level of design control would be Camden, with our part that's in Campbell, because that is a gateway. Highway 17 exit, very much so, because you head off and you look straight ahead, what do you see? Bascom and Hamilton, and also Southwest Expressway. San Jose is going to have a 115-foot tall tower at the corner of Southwest and Bascom, and then next thing you're into Campbell. So it'd be nice to say now you're in Campbell. Campbell Avenue in Bascom, and that becomes the prune yard and that other proposed development where Hickory Pit is. Campbell Avenue at San Tomas Expressway, again, a gateway. You're in the city. And then Winchester, mostly around the Safeway area and the LRT station. I think those were all of them. And I mentioned to you before the meeting that San Jose has urban villages designated for Winchester Boulevard and Bascom And for instance, the Winchester one, it's 4 buildings from our Hamilton, and they're going to go 7 stories. And next thing you know, we're going to go back down, and there's no introduction that now you're in Campbell. So Winchester and Hamilton, Bascom, I've already mentioned, in Southwest, but you get to the end of San Jose's urban village, how do you know all of a sudden that you're in Campbell? And why I mentioned that topic, we don't want urban villages. We want neighborhood villages. And San Jose did create that new category in their general plan on the last update, is because they called Cambrian Park Plaza Urban Village, and everybody came unglued. So they created a new category called neighborhood village, which basically is the same thing, but a little less dense.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lopez.
So I have a question first. How are you defining gateways in this section?
So I'd broadly characterize our existing general plan, as well as our upcoming one, Envision Campbell, has a map diagram showing where all the city's gateways occur. We do have a new, the focus of tonight's isn't really on gateways. Where should our gateways be, and what should you have a sign there as you're introduced into an area? We're going to be updating our gateways policy as a policy program as part of the new general plan. But for this discussion purpose, we're just trying to articulate, are there certain areas like the downtown which warrant a higher level design review than others? So that they're known, so that we can design and develop specific, getting back to the point of like form-based code standards, so this specific site or that specific site should have a higher level of design review than others. So that we know, let's say the downtown's critical, that we get that tighter range in the amount of glazing, or that we're applying that level of more prescriptive control to achieve a more desired outcome, versus leaving other areas that can be a bit more open-ended or eclectic.
Real quick, can I clarify? When I said gateway, I meant the architectural control at those locations, what I'm calling gateways, right?
Understood.
That was clear?
And
Okay.
as Councilmember Landry was commenting earlier, that's a good characterization as to any area that you think there's a specific context that should be addressed uniquely, like when you're coming off of Highway 17, and you're looking at the Fry's building, and that's a kind of a gateway element, and you think that building warrants a higher level of architectural control than the spans where you're driving in between, that would be a good example.
Sure, thank you. So it's hard for me to say. So first off, I agree with Councilor Landry regarding the flexibility of things like paint. So just want to make sure that we maintain that. And not go so prescriptive and limited. It's difficult for me to say whether we should have a higher level of control in downtown without knowing precisely what the trade-offs there. So I'm open to that in concept, but I just would need to see more concrete examples. And the only thing I would add for this is that something that I think would be really valuable to capture here is a little bit more aspirational, continuing with the goal that we have of connecting downtown to other parts of the city, like Pruneyard, potentially to the Fry's property. This may be the spot to really define exactly what that means. So those kind of corridors in line with the walkability. But I think if we don't include that, that'd be a huge missed opportunity. So I'd like to see us continue with that goal.
Thank you, Councilmember Gibbons.
Thank you. I agree about the Fry's and the walkability. I'll just offer some history, just FYI. The history behind the term gateway was not buildings, it was signage. It was signage like what Cupertino's done. If you drive along the various arteries in Cupertino, they have some very nice sculptural signage and elements, and that defines, I know I'm in Cupertino. It is not, it was not originally intended to be related to buildings. And to be honest with you, I think that's an overreach. I don't think we need special design. I think that the identity of the city can be handled in a more simple, straightforward way. I have a lot of comments on the design, but there's a section that the planning commission where you said what's missing. So there'll be an opportunity to say that at the end of this.
On this item or in general?
At the end of the planning commission, there was a point where you can say what was missing. So do you want me to put that in now?
If it's on the design standards.
If it relates to the
No.
section, yeah.
Okay. So I said before that it's hard to answer some of the questions because we don't have the overlay of where mixed use is and isn't. Also, the doesn't have design standards related to height. So if a building is 2 stories, you might have a different frontage than if it's 4 stories, if it's 6 stories or 10 stories. So I don't see that in the material, and I think that's pretty critical. There is no standard or discussion about overhangs in public right-of-ways and clearances. That comes in, there's an example in one of the pictures where it's a paseo or whatever, and they have balconies and things overhanging. That works very well, and that can really make a difference depending on the sidewalk width and where it's located and how high, what the speed is of the road. So I think there's some context of design decisions that should recognize the width of the road, the number of lanes, the speed, and where and when vertical and horizontal articulation of the facade is appropriate. And if that articulation can extend over sidewalks or some other feature of a site. The illustrations of the breaking down of large sites, I think, is a little too rectilinear, too grid-like. I think you want to have character. So I don't know that we want to prescribe that it has to be a grid.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
There's a later discussion item on large sites. I just want
Okay,
to
so I'll
clarify.
skip that one. Thank you. We're, let's see, building envelopes, let's see, building envelopes maybe. All right. Definition of open space, okay for here?
I guess my recommendation would be if there's specific feedback in this bucket, now would be the time. If at the end there's sort of a catch-all, I'd leave that to the council.
My comment then is I don't see reference to the building codes and how that influences what the facades can do and can't do, driveways and sightlines. I think that's probably where I'll go unless I come up with something else, which I'm sure I will.
So,
Vice Mayor, please.
thank you. So I agree that there should be a higher level of design control in downtown. And I'd also like to see some higher level of control on the gateways. Two that come to mind would be the Fry's site and the Campbell and Bascom development there. Those two would come to mind. I just think that it should be an impact and it should be representative of us and something that we would be proud of, and I think it should make a statement.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. Downtown, the key area is downtown and the prune yard, and then any connection between those. But I agree too with the gateways. I mean, Fry's is an obvious one, but I think anywhere you're coming in to the city, particularly from San Jose, where you might see a lot more dense developments, and there's a lot of places there, right? That's on Bascom, maybe near Camden, even that could be on Hamilton near San Tomas Expressway, Campbell down to San Tomas. Where you're entering Campbell, I think it should be. I think it should differ, right? You should be able to notice that you've gone into a different area, I think. And I'm not sure how you do that, but I mean, the idea would be wherever you're coming in a major area, not just off freeways, then I'd like to see a differentiation. And I agree too, this all aspects is a little daunting because paint's an obvious one. I mean, we're not have the paint police, and the reality is in years and years, I can think of one residence and one business that were painted what were almost shocking when you see the color they picked. And you know what happens over time? They either repaint it, it gets sold and they repaint it, or you after a little while, it just doesn't even phase you anymore. And it's not the end of the world. So we can overregulate for that kind of thing, which is not typically even a problem. So, and you could then get down into what kind of pavers can you use on a driveway. To me, I would be careful about the all aspects, but I don't know how to define that. But other than that, I mean, that's really the only comments I have. And I think the downtown prune yard plus connection is like the most critical probably. Thank you. That's 60%.
3 down, 2 to go. Okay, the next one, Tracy had presented areas where the design standards are recommending adjacencies. Both staff and the Planning Commission had identified these areas: shallow lots, creeks, industrial uses, public parks, rights-of-way, denser walkable areas. There's a couple of design approaches that are in the report. It's very technical on how you get to those, but we just want to present those are approaches we have. Basically, at this point, do you agree with the staff recommendation to go forward on these areas and having the adjacency standards?
Okay. Councilmember Gibbons?
Thank you. So I made a comment earlier that I think we all began this process recognizing that we had to provide housing and that we had to provide affordable housing. But the council was unanimous over the course of quite a few meetings saying that we still want Campbell to be Campbell. And these adjacencies kind of bring that to the forefront. We know that some lots are shallow. We know that they have constraints, but the goal, I believe, that the council has consistently said is we're not looking to maximize the development on a site. We're looking for the right development in the context of the community and the neighbors. So I would look to the Winchester site example that you had, because that was thoughtfully done. It was recognized that there were skinny lots and deep lots. So that's a known entity. And the decisions were made with that knowledge. I think adjacent to creeks is an important consideration. Riparian corridors and natural habitats probably need some kind of an overlay map that identifies how they need to be respected. There was one comment at the Planning Commission about wanting access to the creek and the creek trail. That is worth verifying, but my understanding in past projects is that's controlled by the county and they do not allow multiple access points. So we have to be responsive to what that regulation is. Adjacent to industrial uses, I think you have to look at what the market will support, being in a location that has non-residential adjacencies in the area of industrial and even commercial, but less so commercial. Properties adjacent to public parks and schools. I think the whole discussion we had about shade, I thought there was an excellent comment made earlier about the solar panels and making sure that parks and schools and public facilities aren't detrimentally impacted by loss of privacy, loss of sunlight, and that kind of thing. And properties adjacent to right-of-ways and highways and expressways, they're difficult sites. So I think that frankly, those are the kind of sites that the developer probably has more flexibility about what they know they can make work and not work for what types of uses and designs. Locating denser walkable areas such as downtown, properties located in denser walkable areas. So I think what you're asking is, do we have to be sensitive to the density related to walkable areas and the adjacencies to single family residences? I think the answer is that's probably extremely critical throughout our community, given the diversity of opportunity sites. And then include the design approaches identified in the report, wedding cakes. I agree that building masses need to be broken up. The 1,800 linear feet is a hard number. That sounds very high to me. I think we need an example of what Campbell, you had an example in the picture about Campbell's downtown block. It would be better to understand with something more connected, visually connected, to explain what that means. The wedding cake, I think, is problematic in the illustrations and the pictures, not in concept, but remember that there are balconies and people go out in balconies. Balconies are noisy and they interfere with privacy. Smaller buildings breaking up building masses, I think, is appropriate for Campbell.
Thank you. Councilmember Lopez.
I largely agree with the recommendations and approach. So I won't go over down everything one by one, but I do want to emphasize, I think the creek and riparian corridor, those uses are particularly important. And I would like to add one here, which is that as we consider that some of the impacts of the different work we're doing may be going higher in some places, that we look at bird safe windows above a certain height, and there's been some good best practices established there. But I leave that to staff. I think that would be appropriate to plan for the future. The only thing I'll add is that and I may just be fixating on the example that was used, but the photo of the wedding cake approach, and in addition to the comments that were just made, I wouldn't want, and again, it will depend on what's brought back in terms of the specific recommendations. I wouldn't want to overregulate the number of layers that need to be part of that, the way it steps up. And the reason for that is I recently did a tour of affordable home projects, and this was near the downtown San Jose area, which is kind of an extreme example where you have very different uses up against each other. And I was surprised. There was one that I looked at in particular that had one level of the step up, but it was far enough back that you didn't need the multiple levels. And from the street, you'd never know that there was the larger mass behind it. So I would favor something like that. That's what I think of as a more moderate kind of wedding cake approach, rather than the many different levels, but that still is appropriate to the neighborhood, respects privacy, all those concerns. Because I think there's some very successful examples of that. I would prefer something like that to be used rather than defaulting to some of the other suggestions like smaller buildings or breaks in building mass, which I think can be appropriate in some places, but I don't want to. I just really want to look at all options. So I think privacy is important. I think respecting uses is important. I'll just add, with all due respect to the comments that have been made, I don't think shade is always a bad thing. And as we look to the future, we're going to see more and more droughts, just the record heat wave that we had this past year. And so I think some of the planning thinking of the past that, we want to avoid shade in all areas, there may be places where that actually creates much more pedestrian friendly areas. Again, not in cases where you want to impact a neighborhood, but where it's appropriate, it may actually be a positive thing. So I don't want to automatically go to saying shade is always bad. Unfortunately, I think we'll need a lot more of it.
Thank you. Councilwoman Landry.
Thank you. So I'll have to emphasize creeks and riparian corridors. Don't forget perk ponds. We had a project that came forward and said, oh, I'm not next to the creek, I'm next to the perk pond. Well, the bird doesn't know the difference between you cross the perk pond and that. The most impacted area would be by the tech park. There's perk ponds right around the tech park and on McGlincy. So, and it's the Valley Water District has bird-friendly building design, and that's addressed what Sergio was talking about, glazing in relation to the creek and the corridor, and it's not just the first floor, it's the whole entire building. Regarding shade, yes, we need shade, but we also need ability to have solar. And so it's, if you have a stepped back building next to the lower, then it's not as much of an issue, but on shallow lots, I don't know that how much step back you're going to get to still get some level of density. I don't know why we have to worry about properties adjacent to the highways and our expressways. The mention of that Llewellyn parcel, I could see it very tall against Santa Tomas Expressway. That gives you the density and keeps you lower next to the single family homes that are there. So I'm not quite sure why highways and expressways have to have a specific requirement to being adjacent to them. I don't know if this is the right place to say it, but this whole thing of breaking up the building masses, and there's comments about having these streets dividing up the blocks. I heard basically what the developer talked about, and I think it adds a lot to the cost of the project. And so, yes, we want breaks in the building mass, but I don't know that it needs to be a street. It could be, the fire lane could be a passageway without vehicles. If this whole thing is to get away from vehicle-oriented things, then having the breakup by a building or by a street, to me, is counterproductive. I think that answers all of them.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor.
I agree with the standards as recommended, and just wanted to mention that I really want to ensure that the creeks and natural habitats, there's standards in place to safeguard those areas, and then also to consider how the development will encroach on existing neighborhoods as far as building height and mass.
Thank you. And I agree in general. I too wondered about the highways and expressways. It just seemed odd that that was a concern. I know that in the past there have been concerns about signage visible from the freeway and stuff like that. I'm not sure that I would include that. I think the key takeaway, it was mentioned earlier by a resident, was protecting adjacency to neighborhoods, and we've done that. It doesn't have to be drastic. We've done that. I remember when they built in these much smaller developments, built on Kennedy and kind of redesigned it to like a 2.5 instead of a 3, and it actually looks quite different than the original design. And the other way to do it was the properties on Gale behind the Culinary Institute. They had some tall properties, but they moved they put lower units on Gale, which were very consistent with an established neighborhood, and put larger units in the middle, and they're not really obtrusive. So it can be done. I would just say that's the most important thing. But other than that, and the question about highways and expressways, I'm fine with the list.
May I? To respond to Councilwoman Landry's comment about building masses and separations, one good example in Campbell, and I think it's the name of it's the Revere, it's the one near Campese and on Bascom. The original project came through with 3 separate buildings, and then it was nice. It had some flexibility and open space, and you could walk through. And then the developer came back and said, I want density bonus. And the way they got the density bonus was to fill it in. So it is literally like a walled city. You can't get through it. It's completely enclosed. And the inside is so hot that the artificial grass melts. So that's when we talk about breaking things up. It also, I mean, it's pretty overwhelming physically in the area. So I think that's a good example locally of why breaking up mass helps.
I agree with breaking up the mass. I just said not having a vehicular corridor, having pedestrian corridors to break up the mass versus they had the diagrams of the blocks and the roads going through. That's what I was
looking at the pictures that said they didn't have to be roads.
No, I did. We need to break up the building mass, just not with throughways for cars.
So Rob, we're down to the last one. I got a question for you because I want to be sensitive to getting to parklets, and we have people waiting for a long time. We'll get through large sites. If there are additional things that are beyond the scope of these 5, can we provide input? This is a receiver report anyway, so this is not action being taken tonight. I just want to, at some point, we're almost 11 o'clock. We can get to parklets.
this is a study session. So yeah, at this point, there's no final recommendations tonight. We're receiving your input to move the objective standards forward. That answers the question, Mayor.
Okay, I just want to give some hope to the people still waiting in the back here. Okay, large sites.
Okay, so this is the last one. Taking everything you've heard, both staff and the Planning Commission landed at this recommendation, which is to establish a 5-acre standard for large sites. Have the principle that large sites based on context and neighborhood would be divided. There's a process to go through that, not to be over prescriptive on having streets. It could be a pedestrian paseo or something else. And without, again, being over prescriptive, to at least include at this point opportunities to require civic art space and open space. So again, there's nothing before you tonight. This has a certain percentage or requirement to at least include that these could be requirements going forward. That's staff recommendation that concurs with Planning Commission recommendation, and it's to council for concurrence or additional comments on this.
Councilman Landry?
As I already mentioned, I'm tag teaming on what our one person, I forgot your first name, I'm sorry, but I think it's a burden on a developer to require a street for vehicles and then say, okay, well, we'll make you do a street, but we're going to make the building taller and reduce the parking. I'd rather see the building shorter, more parking, and less vehicles dividing up the site. So a fire lane can be a pedestrian walkway, a utility corridor could be a pedestrian walkway. Those then create the civic spaces and the ins and outs of the building. It's not one big massive wall, but you can have those corridors and just not have to have all these private streets, especially because we're reducing parking. We aren't going to have as many cars. Why do we need as many streets? I'm really curious if we have 20 of these 5 acres. I could picture maybe 5. I'm not sure where 20 of these 5-acre sites are. And that brings me to something else, is we've talked a lot about these large multifamily developments, but there's going to be a lot of smaller multifamily developments. There's going to be ones on 1, 2, and 3 acres, and we haven't really talked much about those in any of the stuff that I've read. So no, I do not agree with the recommendation of dividing it up by private streets, but other than that, I do.
Councilmember Lopez?
I want to second that. I feel very strongly. So the general idea of breaking up large sites, yes, but I really don't want it to be space for vehicles, because what ends up happening there in these new developments is that then those become dead areas where it's not inviting to residents to be out there. You have a lot of young families moving into these developments, and it becomes dangerous for children. There's a lot of accidents there. So I get very nervous about that. And it's also just more forbidding to anybody coming from outside looking at the space. It's not a space that you would walk into, or that I think it cuts off the connection from the neighborhood. And I think having it be pedestrian oriented will also address some of the developer concerns about the width and how much that's reducing the space. Other than that, I'm okay with exploring some of the ideas for potentially offering other trade-offs for some of the things that we're requiring here. And I think some of the suggestions are reasonable. The only thing that I'll add about the art, understanding that the specifics of that would come later, is let's look at options other than a percentage of the budget. I think that can be limiting because, for example, a mural would be a much different cost and percentage than having a large art piece or sculpture or something like that. And I again don't want to spend too much time, but I'm open to some of the other suggestions, like the ones that the city attorney brought up, and exploring those. And also I thought the suggestion or the question raised and the suggestion was a good one by Mr. Sullivan and the comments about other ideas for breaking up the blocks and being sensitive to different uses for some of those sites. Also very curious to see that map, what that looks like, and hopefully that comes back in a later discussion. Thank you.
Councilmember Gibbons.
Thanks. I do probably say things that people aren't going to be happy about, but you know me, I usually say that anyway. I think we might try looking at the large sites in somewhat of a different way. I understand the need to talk about dividing into streets and paseos. The building code and the fire marshals will determine a lot about how big buildings can be and how they can be broken up. But I think instead of talking about streets being broken up, and I'm not sure I'm going to phrase this totally right, it's how big the buildings are. It's one of the original examples that was given with that long building. And I think what we're looking for is a context of buildings that could be separated by 10-foot wide paseos or 20-foot wide paseos or 30-foot wide roads. I think what we're trying to do, like the example I gave of the Riviera, is we don't want these solid masses that are non-penetratable, non-visually or physically penetratable. And I think that applies in all large lots. And it's hard, frankly, without a map to know what we're talking about. I mean, I can think of a 3.5 acre lot that has a church on it. I can think of a 10 acre lot that has a shopping center on it. I can think of a 15 acre lot that has a shopping center. So it's a little bit hard to, without having, at least for me, having a visual understanding of where these are. And I think what was mentioned by Mr. Sullivan is there, how do we work with sites that have access on one side or on two sides, not all four sides? So to me, the issue is more the physical breakup and massing of the buildings to create the one topic that I felt we haven't talked about, and I mentioned earlier, is the space in between. People take for granted the space in between. That can be the pedestrian space walking down the street. That can be the space between the buildings. That can be the alcove. These are all the things that contribute to the quality of the environment created by buildings, because the majority of us experience the space between, not the space inside. So I'd like to see if there's some way of working with that. And that's why I was talking about horizontal and vertical articulation and setbacks for different uses. There's a lot of characteristics, criteria that really helps with any new project. And frankly, to me, it's one of the critical things about adjusting to what's going to happen if we go over our 75-foot height standard that the voters approved. How are we going to handle that? So I think that is important. And I don't know, again, I don't know how to phrase this. If we do something that a lot of the photographic examples were challenging for me because they all showed wrapped buildings. That's a system where there's parking in the middle and the housing wraps around it. They are by nature very big. The example given in the Planning Commission was 470 feet, if my memory serves me correct, as a continuous facade. And I think we have to look at what are the components and the width of buildings. Is it, and I know I'm getting technical here, but you know, is it a single corridor with apartments on both sides, or is it a single width building? There's a lot of variety that make a project cost effective. And the most important one in my experience is the net to gross. What can you rent out? So I'd like to see the discussion of large sites talk about what goes on them, as well as what we talked about earlier, which is the context of the surrounding neighbors. Because a lot of our large sites are surrounded by single family residences. And I think we need to think about that. And then the impact of parking, because a good number of our large space locations are adjacent to light rails or bus routes. So let's see. I think that's, and the final comment I think I started to say is parks. We have not really clarified or discussed. There's really multiple definitions of open space. There's private open space. There's the development open space. And then there is the public open space. The term civic space here would be defined in my way of thinking as being public open space, like a park space. And you might have child play equipment or something on it, that kind of thing. So I think it's important that we want to require all our housing projects to have, depending on their size, private open space, meaning a deck probably, a shared common open space, and then depending on their size in large sites, more of a community open space, because we have a requirement for open space. Is it 1 acre for every 3,000 people? And we're behind on that. So I think we need to think about that, particularly on large sites.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Bybee.
Thank you. So I do support the dividing up the large sites into smaller blocks with an emphasis more on the pedestrian paseos and less on the private streets, dividing the private streets dividing. I also support the civic spaces, the art and open space, and concur with Councilmember Gibbons that we need a variety of the open space to address public needs as well as the private development and the just ability for people to have open space on their in the development.
Thank you. And I'll say, just in general, I agree with what you presented here. The hard part for me on this one is I'd like to know the actual sites, right? 20 seems a lot, but we all know we can all identify 5 or 6 probably in our minds, but I'd like to know that because I think has been said here, the location of the site and the use on that site makes a big difference. And depending on the use, some of this pedestrian area pass through in a mixed use might take care of itself. And location wise, especially if these sites are situated near neighborhoods, which brings up the adjacency issue, there may be differences there. So I don't just, of the 5 areas we've talked about, this is the hardest one for me. And I don't think, unless I know where the sites are and what maybe intended uses are, I agree with breaking it up. I agree pedestrian is important. I agree that the open space is important. And the city attorney has given probably the best answer for art as far as being able to control what's on there. That's all good, but I think until we know what we're talking about specifically, I would not be more specific on this one. So we've actually made it through all of them.
Congratulations.
Now we're not, I see here, this is a received report. There's not really a motion required.
Excuse me, Paul. They asked very specific questions, but I had some kind of broader comments. Are we going to get those tonight? Or
We can, but how much time? Because we have
1 minute.
We have a couple minutes or two because we have to get to parklets and
I know, but we're here moving forward, and there's some areas that weren't addressed.
Go for it. Go ahead. Go.
Thank you. I'll be really quick.
Thank you.
We've been talking about these large multifamily developments as if they're not neighborhoods within themselves. They are going to be neighborhoods within themselves. So there is a relationship between a single family lot and a multifamily. They're all going to be a neighborhood. Where is there an assessment of how many schools may neither be added or expanded? I haven't heard anything about new housing and new development as it relates to schools. And my last comment is there was a statement that one of the consultants said about, oh, we're going to have wider sidewalks, but we'll allow outdoor dining. The public sidewalk should not have outdoor dining. And if you're planning for outdoor dining, it should be part of the private open space. And then these are all looking very urban. We are not urban, and nowhere have I seen anything with meandering sidewalks.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Lopez, any closing comments or?
I'll be very brief. I just want to emphasize, as I brought up in the questions and as our first commenter said, I don't want to just be locked into the uses that have been built up over the past, and where we can continue to improve walkability over the years. Let's do that.
Okay, Councilmember Gibbons.
I would like to have some thought process, including that there might be mixed building types, mixed housing types on various sites. I think that might be what the Llewellyn site might have. It might have townhouses, it might have an apartment building, it might have single family housing. I think a mixture of housing types is worth understanding. Some examples that I think are good in Campbell, and I think it's called the Town Place. It's the one underneath the water tower. That's a good condominium housing project with parking and so forth. That's a nicely designed project. The recently designed project at Winchester and Friar Way, which backs up into single family neighborhood, is another good one. Some bad ones would be the interior of the Cressley development. And then Madison, the townhomes, they are introverted such that you drive into your garage. There's no door on the street. You literally drive into your garage. Your front door is on a path that basically nobody goes on, and people don't know their neighbors, and there's no eyes on the street. So to me, those are a couple of helpful examples.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Bobby.
I just wanted to thank staff for the presentation. It was well organized and informative, and thank you for working through all of our questions.
And I'll just finish. I'll echo that. I think the way you went through it was very easy to follow and very easy to understand each section. So it was actually very helpful that way. So thank you very much to the entire staff team that did that. Appreciate it. So you got that's sufficient input, I guess, or more than you?
More enough. Pages of notes. We have good direction moving forward.
Okay, and this will come back again.
Yes,
to the next council.
As you know, we have juggling balls in the air. We're about to dramatically do a shift back into the housing element, and we'll be back before you in 2 weeks. But given this direction, the consultant will prepare a draft of the standards, and that draft will come back to you in the January-February timeframe, as seen on the screen.
When you get all new input from new people and start all over again.
We hope you're watching tonight.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to item 9, semi-permanent parklet grant program. And
so I know the hour is late. So Leslie does have a presentation. It basically does mimic the staff report. If you like, we could skip the presentation. You can move. I know you have public speakers, and then be available for comments. Your choice.
We can. I mean, you're essentially bring back what we discussed earlier. If everybody's open with that, we can bring the public speakers in, and then we can address questions, comments. So Leslie, once we do that, is that fair? Is there a particular ask or so that on the last slide?
Yeah, go ahead and come on. There's just a quick question.
I don't need to bring up the slide. I just want to. Hi, challenged. Good morning.
Not yet. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay. So in summary, the last slide, we are prepared once the program is approved. Staff is prepared to conduct a business outreach meeting in person and virtual. This will probably occur after Thanksgiving holiday. We're preparing a flyer with program details that will be sent by email to the businesses. The application process will open January 9th, 2023, and will be open till February 6th, 2023. All applications have to be completed by that date. The Chamber is assisting us and will maintain a list of contractors who are eligible to construct the parklets. So that will be the final stage or phase of the parklet a grant
Okay,
program process.
Appreciate the brevity. We can hold
Okay.
questions probably until it comes back. So
Okay.
guys, let's open the public hearing and appreciate people waiting. Randy and Ken, either one. Reverse alphabetically as it turns out. So thanks for hanging in.
No worries.
Pull the mic up if you just pull it up closer to you. Thank you.
My name's Randy Muster, 2645 Kirtner Glen Court, Campbell, California, 95008. I'm the owner of Sushi Confidential in downtown Campbell. Thank you, Mayor Resnikoff and City Council members. Our Parklet initiative came about due to the pandemic to help restaurants recover from the devastating losses. Now we are facing the highest levels of inflation and possibly followed by a recession. These parklets will provide a continued lifeline to restaurants in our downtown core to allow us to provide additional dining options to our guests, in turn, providing higher sales and profits. Increases in sales will yield an increase in sales tax to the city of Campbell. Restaurant owners in downtown Campbell have spent many hours working with the Planning Commission to come up with the best options for these parklets. We greatly appreciate that the city of Campbell is willing to divert some of the emergency funds to help subsidize these parklets, especially due to the increased construction costs. Many of our restaurant owners would not be able to afford them. I'm on the front lines every day listening to our guests. They love the idea of the permanent parklets and are excited that they are here to stay. Thank you for supporting businesses in Campbell and helping to create a thriving community. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate your comments and again, hanging in. Ken, did you want to? Okay, so for people can't hear you, that was a no. Appreciate you hanging in too. I don't see anybody left online. We've outlasted everybody online. So I'll bring it back to council for discussion or a motion to adopt the resolution. So
I have a
are
question.
there comments? Yeah, certainly.
Okay, thanks.
Questions, comments, or
Okay.
yeah.
I asked staff this earlier. Could you clarify, do we have a map of the locations or the proposed locations? Not all restaurants or businesses have asked, so I know you might not know all of them up to the 16. And two, we had asked this earlier on how, who signs up for the grant and who, in terms of tenant and owner, what's the tenant and owner requirement and participation and responsibility?
Okay, two-part question. Do not have a map. We have a map of the existing temporary parklets, but we don't have a map of because we don't have applications yet, but we don't have a map of potentially all the new parklets to answer that question.
So the reason I'm asking is one of the property owners contacted me and said that the current parklets go in front of her business or her property. And to a point, they were fine with it, but if they're going permanent, they do not want it. And as a result, it's only half a space in one frontage and half a space in another. So the question is, how would that going to be handled?
Yeah, that came before you previously. It's in the parklet guide, and basically what the guide says is each restaurant gets the lesser of 2 spaces are the maximum frontage of that restaurant.
And it may require restriping the parking around it.
It may. I've talked to the Public Works Director. Once we get the total number of applications, look at how that pans out, we might be some adjustments in the parking spaces.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question in participation responsibility.
Sure. Second question going from member. So 2 tests. One is applying for a parking permit by itself, parklet permit. One is applying for the grant. To remind the council, the parklet is owned by the actual property owner. Applying for the grant, I think we had landed at both the property owner and the and the business be a signatory to the grant or applying for the grant.
Thank you. If I heard you correctly, both the permit and the grant require the property owner and the business.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Councilwoman Landry?
Yeah, I'm going to just bring this up to our council here. I met with Leslie and Rob. We have economic development proposals that are going to come forward, and part of those are talking about our branding. And what I'm concerned is these panels that are going to be on top of the wall. You're going to have these metal panels. The architect talked about having a replica or image of the water tower. And my comment was, we should be waiting till we have our branding, that we already have signs, the maroon signs, the water tower graphics different. We have a website, the water tower graphic is different, and that because the parklets are coming before we have our branding, that any cutouts, artwork or anything should not be specifically like, oh, this is a water tower, because it's going to have this kind of confusing image of what we're going to do. So it's kind of down to the little implementation and how these panels are, but to not start mimicking water towers and things like that, so it doesn't conflict with what our future branding may be.
Other comments?
I would just say I think it's a really important comment. We have to be thoughtful that it doesn't delay the project. So what it may be is that the panels stay plain and then there's an application on them. I think your point is extremely well taken, but we just want to make sure we aren't delaying the project, and making the panel simple may save some money.
Well, and there can be cutouts and things like that, but not saying, oh, this is a water tower is my point. Yeah.
I just comment that, I mean, we've just talked about variety and not being cookie cutter and all that. And if there's some variance in how they do that or design interpretation, I'm not sure it's bad, but I understand the point. Any other comments? Councilman Lopez?
I really just want to say, thank you to our commenter, and thank you, Ken, really for your role in helping and administer this, and really glad to hear of the walk around tomorrow. So really appreciate the support there. I'll be happy to move the motion, but
I just want to make a comment before. I just wanted to go on record to say that I totally support the parklet program. I don't necessarily support the approach of use of grant funding to implement the program, and for that reason, I'm going to be voting against it. I know that the parklets are very popular, and the restaurants that have them have benefited tremendously from them. The city benefits from it, but there are other businesses in the city that also have struggled through the pandemic and didn't have the availability or the use of parklets, and also some of the retail businesses were affected, and the city really didn't subsidize or help them in the downtown. So I just don't feel that it's equitable, and that everyone all businesses are being considered, and so for that reason, I'm not going to be supporting it.
Okay, thank you.
I just like to add that I appreciate the different points that have been brought up, and I hope some of these can be addressed in the economic development plan that comes up, but certainly understand. But with that said, I would move the motion that the City Council adopt a resolution approving the adoption of the semi-permanent parklet grant program and accompanying budget adjustments to assist business owners with the construction of semi-permanent parklets. Adopt a resolution extending the temporary parklet program March 28th, 2023, and with reference to the desk item that was added as well.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Lopez, second by Councilwoman Landry. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Givens.
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez.
Aye.
Councilwoman Landry.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bybee.
No.
Mayor Resnikoff.
Aye. So thank you very much. That passes. And I think we can probably skip committee reports at this hour. I don't think anybody's going to complain about that. And instead adjourn to the next regularly scheduled council meeting on Tuesday, December 6th, 2022. Special meeting for housing on the 29th at 6 p.m. Thank you very much. Oh. Oh.